She thought she was buying a mistake, a crumbling old movie theater for $500, a relic no one wanted. But the night Clara Reese stepped inside, the air changed. Dust drifted through the beam of her flashlight like ghosts returning to the stage. The seats were torn, the screen shredded, yet something hummed deep within the walls. Then she found it. A locked projector room sealed with rust and initials carved in iron, J.R. What she didn't know was that behind that door waited a secret buried for 70 years and $60 million in gold. After years of silence and small humiliations, it ended with the scratch of a pen. Clara Reese sat across from her ex-husband in the echoing courthouse, a man she once believed would stand beside her forever. The clerk's voice was flat, procedural, cold. "You're free to go." Free, such an empty word. It felt less like release and more like being pushed off a cliff. She gathered the papers, her fingers trembling as though the ink itself carried the weight of every broken promise. Outside, autumn leaves swirled across the courthouse steps, the wind cutting through her coat like glass. She stood for a long moment beneath the gray sky, watching cars drift past. None slowed for her. No one noticed the woman whose world had just quietly collapsed. For years, Clara had measured her worth by what she could hold together: the house, the family, the image of control. But now, all she owned was a beat-up sedan, a storage unit full of furniture she couldn't sell, and the restless fear that her teenage son was starting to look at her the way she looked at herself, lost, ashamed, unfinished. She drove home without turning on the radio. Silence filled the car like fog. Every red light reflected in her tired eyes small flashes of warning she had ignored for too long. The town itself looked worn out, like it had stopped dreaming decades ago. Storefronts boarded up, paint peeling from the diner sign. A place that once glittered with possibility now barely kept its lights on. She understood it too well. When she parked outside her tiny rental, she sat for several minutes before going in. Inside, boxes were stacked against walls she still hadn't decorated. Her son, Ethan, sat at the table doing homework or pretending to. He looked up, reading her face before she said a word. "It's done?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded. "Yeah, it's done." Neither spoke after that. The fridge hummed. A clock ticked. The space between them was filled with all the words they didn't know how to say. Later that night, when Ethan went to bed, Clara sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee and a list of unpaid bills. Rent, utilities, car insurance, all pressing in like a noose tightening. She could feel herself sinking into that familiar panic, the kind that whispers, "There's no way out." But life, even in its cruelest moments, has strange ways of throwing you a lifeline disguised as madness. The next morning, while scanning local ads for jobs and auctions, anything, really she saw it. Old Liberty Theater City Auction, starting bid $500. A photo sat beside the listing, a faded building with Art Deco curves and cracked glass doors. Its marquee hanging crookedly, letters missing like teeth. Most would scroll past it. But something about that image stopped her. There was a loneliness in it, a kind of quiet defiance that mirrored her own. By noon, she was sitting in a folding chair inside the county hall, surrounded by antique dealers and local contractors. The smell of dust and paper filled the room. When the auctioneer called out, "Lot 12, Liberty Theater starting at $500, no one raised a hand. The silence stretched, and then, impulsively, foolishly, she lifted hers. The auctioneer barely blinked. Going once, twice, a pause, sold, a gavel struck. The sound was final, like a judge's verdict. People turned to see who had bought the ruin. A few smirked, a few whispered. But Clara felt a strange surge of warmth spread through her chest, the first flicker of something she hadn't felt in months, possibility. That night, she drove out to see her purchase. The road was narrow and cracked, lined with leafless trees. The building stood at the edge of town like an old monument to forgotten dreams. The once bright marquee read only Lib. Why? The rest lost to time. She parked and stepped out. The air smelled of rain and rust. The front doors resisted at first, then groaned open with a sigh, like the theater itself was exhaling after decades of silence. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint sweetness of old popcorn oil. Rows of torn velvet seats faced a tattered screen hanging like a ghost of its past glory. Sunlight filtered through broken windows, painting long streaks of gold across the faded carpet. It was beautiful in its own broken way, a palace of decay and memory. Clara walked slowly down the aisle, her footsteps echoing off the cracked walls. She could almost hear faint applause, laughter, the hum of projectors long gone cold. She ran her hand along the back of a seat, feeling the fabric crumble beneath her fingertips. For a moment, she forgot her failures. She forgot the divorce papers and the bills. All that existed was this relic, this quiet place waiting for someone to care again. On stage, she found an old microphone still attached to its stand. Dust motes drifted through a shaft of light like slow, falling snow. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Well, Liberty looks like it's you and me now." As she explored further, the air grew colder. The hallways behind the stage twisted like veins, narrow, dim, and lined with peeling posters from the 1950s. Casablanca, Singin' in the Rain, faces of stars long gone, still smiling as if unaware of their own fading. At the far end of the hall, she noticed a narrow staircase leading up to a locked door. Its paint was blistered, its handle sealed with rust. She tugged gently, nothing. Then she saw it, faintly carved into the metal above the handle J. Ah, she frowned, tracing the letters with her fingertip. They felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. Somewhere in the building, a loose shutter banged against the wind, echoing like a heartbeat. The theater seemed to breathe around her, its silence heavy with secrets. She turned off her flashlight and stood in the dark, listening. The rain began to fall outside, soft at first, then harder. It pattered against the roof like a rhythm, slow, steady, insistent. And in that darkness, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years, not fear, but curiosity. Whatever this place had been, whatever story it still held, she could sense it waiting patient and buried behind that door. As the thunder rolled across the empty sky, she smiled faintly through the gloom. Maybe, just maybe, this broken theater was the second chance she didn't know she was looking for. And somewhere deep inside the walls, unseen by her, a light flickered, a faint pulse from the old projector room, as if waking from a very long sleep. As the night deepened, Clara realized the story was only beginning. The next morning arrived draped in fog, the kind that made the world look half dream, half memory. Clara barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that locked door, those letters carved into the metal. J. Ah, they lingered in her mind like a whisper she couldn't quite catch. She made coffee in a chipped mug, staring at the steam as if it might spell out a plan. Ethan shuffled into the kitchen, backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. He glanced at her, then at the stack of property papers on the table. "You're really doing this?" he asked, his tone caught between disbelief and worry. "I already did," she said with a small smile. "It's ours now. Ours." He raised a brow. "Mom, that place looks like it should be condemned." "Maybe," she admitted softly, But it's something, and something is better than nothing. He sighed, nodding in reluctant acceptance before heading out the door. When it closed behind him, the silence returned heavier now, but not as suffocating as before. Clara, dressed in old jeans and a sweatshirt, grabbed her keys and drove toward the theater. The morning mist clung to the windshield like a veil. As she turned onto Main Street, the decaying grandeur of the Liberty appeared through the haze, stubborn, haunting, magnificent. Inside, the air greeted her like a memory left on pause. The same stillness, the same faint echo of forgotten laughter. She carried a toolbox this time, determined to start somewhere, anywhere. The first hours passed in quiet rhythm. She swept dust into piles, gathered scattered film reels, and wiped grime from the faded ticket booth window. Each movement felt almost sacred, as if she were tending to the ghost of someone who had waited too long for company. In the manager's office, she found ledgers coated in dust, pages yellowed and curling. Receipts dated back to 1953. Ticket sales, popcorn orders, maintenance requests, each one a fragment of a life long gone. On one page, written in an elegant hand, she saw a note. Premiere night. Operation Dawnlight invite only. She frowned. Operation Dawnlight, the name pulsed in her head, unfamiliar yet oddly weighted. She turned the page, it ended there. No details, no follow-up entries after that night. The rest of the ledger was blank. A chill ran up her spine. The theater had died suddenly, like someone had pulled its heartbeat out mid-show. Hours later, she stood at the center of the auditorium, looking up at the ceiling's peeling murals, celestial figures painted in faded blues and golds. They once shimmered under the glow of the chandeliers, she imagined, but now looked like saints caught in limbo. Sunlight cut through a crack in the boarded door, slicing the darkness into golden dust motes. She turned slowly, following the beam until it landed on the projection booth high above the seats. The stairs creaked as she climbed, the metal railing cold beneath her hand. When she reached the booth, the smell of old celluloid hit her sharp, chemical, intoxicating. The projector sat like a fossil, its lenses clouded, reels tangled in cobwebs. She brushed them away gently, feeling the rough edges of the machine beneath her fingertips. A label near the base read, Rains & Co. Cinema Systems, the name struck her again. Rains. She had seen it carved below those same initials, J.R. Her heart began to pound, slow but heavy. She leaned closer, peering through the lens. Dust drifted inside like tiny galaxies. She reached for the switch instinctively, though she knew the power was long gone. Still, the motion felt right, like testing, if the past could breathe again. A bird fluttered from the rafters, startling her. She laughed quietly to herself, shaking off the nerves. "You scared me," she whispered into the emptiness. That's when she noticed a faint outline on the far wall, rectangular, just slightly darker than the rest. She ran her hand over it. It sounded hollow. She tapped once, then again. The echo was unmistakable. There was space behind it. Clara crouched, tracing the wall's edge with her fingers until she found a seam no thicker than a thread. Her pulse quickened. The locked door, the initials, the ledger's last entry, it all pointed here. She stepped back, trying to collect herself. This was supposed to be a renovation project, not a mystery. Yet the theater had a way of pulling her deeper, layer by layer, into its silence. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The weather was turning. She looked down from the booth window. The seats below sat in their endless rows, silent witnesses to whatever had happened here decades ago. A thought drifted through her mind like smoke. What if something terrible happened during that premiere? What if the door wasn't locked to keep people out, But to keep something in, she laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're losing it, Clara." Still, she couldn't shake the sense of presence, as though the building was listening. By late afternoon, she stepped outside to breathe. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in amber and ash. Across the street, an old man stood watching her from a bench. His posture was stiff, his hat pulled low. She lifted a hand in greeting, but he turned away. When she glanced back at the theater, its cracked marquee glowed faintly in the dying light. The word Liberty caught the last shimmer of the sun, casting a golden reflection across her car. It felt like an omen, one she couldn't yet name. That night, at home, Clara lay awake in bed, listening to the rain. Every creak of the old house reminded her of the theater's breath, the echo of its heartbeat through the walls. Sleep refused to come. Her mind replayed every strange detail, the carved initials, the hollow wall, the empty ledger pages. Finally, she rose quietly, made tea, and sat by the window. Outside, lightning split the clouds for a moment, bathing the town in white light. And in that flash, she saw it clearly in her imagination, the Liberty Theatre alive again. Its marquee blazing, the crowd gathered for Operation Dawnlight, cameras flashing, then darkness, silence, vanishing from history. Her chest tightened. The story was hiding there, waiting. Maybe it wasn't gold or treasure she was chasing. Maybe it was truth. She didn't yet understand that the two would soon become the same thing. When dawn came, she packed a notebook, flashlight, and crowbar into her car. She didn't tell Ethan where she was going, because she already knew what she had to do next. She had to open that door. As the morning light bled across the horizon, Clara drove toward the Liberty, her heart steady now, not from peace, but from purpose. The story she had stumbled into was much older, much darker, and far more valuable than she could imagine. And somewhere inside that decaying theater, something was waiting, listening, ready to be found. As the engine hummed and the building's silhouette came into view, a single thought echoed in her mind like a vow: "Whatever's behind that wall, I'm going to find it." And with that, the Liberty Theatre awakened to its new keeper, a woman with nothing left to lose, and everything left to discover. As the day began, the dust of the past stirred once more. The story was far from over. Morning sunlight spilled through the clouds like liquid gold as Clara unlocked the front doors of the Liberty Theatre. The hinges moaned in protest, as though the building itself resented being disturbed from its long sleep. She stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of damp velvet and forgotten years. Dust swirled through the light like faint memories, the ghosts of applause that once filled the space. Her footsteps echoed softly as she crossed the lobby. Cracked tiles beneath her shoes reflected dull glints of color from the faded mosaic patterns. Once, this place had been grand, a temple of light and laughter. Now, it was an empty husk echoing with time. But somehow, that emptiness comforted her. It was honest. Clara brushed her hand over the concession counter, tracing its chipped marble surface. A popcorn machine sat behind it, rusted solid, its glass cloudy with grime. When she pressed her palm against it, flakes of paint came away like ash. Everything about the theater felt fragile, not ruined, but paused, as if waiting for permission to exist again. She wandered deeper, flashlight in hand. The beam danced over torn posters, brittle film strips curling like dead leaves. The silence was heavy, but not lifeless. Every sound she made, the scrape of her boots, the whisper of her breath, seemed amplified, carried by the acoustics of a room designed for wonder. Halfway down the aisle, she stopped. A single seat stood perfectly upright among rows of collapsed ones. Its red fabric was strangely preserved, untouched by decay. She ran her fingers along the armrest, feeling the cool metal beneath the dust. For a heartbeat, she imagined someone sitting there, coat draped neatly, eyes on the silver screen, unaware that time was about to swallow everything. She shook the thought away, forcing a small smile. "You've officially lost it," she murmured to herself. Still, the sensation didn't fade. When she reached the stage, the floorboards groaned under her weight. She knelt beside the curtain, brushing away decades of grime, revealing deep crimson beneath. A sudden draft moved through the room, soft at first, then strong enough to make the curtain sway like a heartbeat. Her flashlight flickered. She frowned, tapping it lightly. It steadied. But for a brief moment, she thought she saw movement behind the curtain, a shape, a shadow. She exhaled slowly, just whined. She whispered, though her voice betrayed doubt. Behind the stage, she found a narrow hallway leading to the projection room stairwell. The plaster peeled in long, curling strips, and old movie posters clung to the walls like fragile skin. The Great Escape, Roman Holiday, The Gold Rush. Irony didn't escape her, the gold rush indeed. The staircase creaked as she ascended, dust falling like snow with every step. When she reached the top, she hesitated before the door marked projection booth. The padlock was old but broken, the latch dangling loosely as if someone had forced it long ago. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first, a sharp blend of rust, mildew, and something chemical, like decayed film stock. Inside, sunlight filtered through narrow glass panes, cutting through the gloom in pale ribbons. The projector sat in the center like a slumbering beast, its reels tangled and corroded, the lens clouded with dust. Clara approached slowly, reverently, as though stepping into a chapel. She touched the cold metal, feeling the texture of years pressed into it. Something about the machine stirred her. It was more than a relic. It was memory made physical. On the small work table beside it, she found old film reels stacked haphazardly. Some were labeled Newsreel 1949, Local Ads, Premiere Night. Others bore no markings at all. She carefully lifted one, feeling its brittle weight. Her gaze drifted to the window that overlooked the auditorium. Through it, she could see the entire space below, a silent sea of seats, the empty stage, the fractured screen. For a moment, she imagined the projector coming alive again, flooding the room with light, sound, and life, but the illusion faded, replaced by the cold truth of dust and ruin. Then something caught her eye, a faint glint beneath the projector, like metal catching light. She crouched down and reached underneath, fingers brushing against something solid. She pulled out a small brass key, tarnished with age. Its teeth were jagged, hand-filed, not factory-made. She turned it over in her palm, reading the faint engraving on its side, Rain. Her breath hitched. J.R., the initials again, the same ones carved into the locked door she'd found days ago. The theater was speaking to her in symbols, one key at a time. She pocketed it and looked around again, scanning the walls for anything out of place. That's when she noticed the faint outline of a rectangular panel near the back corner of the booth. The edges were barely visible, hidden behind layers of peeling paint. She stepped closer, brushing the surface with her fingers. It felt hollow. Behind her, the faint echo of footsteps sounded from somewhere below. She froze. The noise came again, slower this time, deliberate. Someone was in the building. Clara killed her flashlight and stood perfectly still, heart hammering. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. After a moment, she exhaled shakily. Maybe it was just the wind again, or the building settling. Still, she couldn't shake the chill crawling up her spine. Leaving the booth door slightly ajar, she descended the stairs quietly. Her shoes crunched on scattered glass as she moved through the narrow hallway. She peeked into the lobby, empty. Only the faint hum of traffic from outside reached her. She set her flashlight on the counter and leaned against it, forcing herself to breathe. "You're fine," she muttered under her breath, "just nerves." To distract herself, she wandered toward the back office again. She began sorting through old boxes, brittle movie tickets, projector bulbs, and crumbling ledgers. That's when she found it, a stack of black and white photographs tucked inside a metal tin. They showed the theater in its prime glowing marquee, crowds dressed in evening wear, smiling ushers lined up like soldiers. And in one photo, dated July 1953, she saw him, a man in a suit, standing proudly in front of the screen. The nameplate on his jacket read, Jonathan Raines, owner. He stood beside a small group of men in military uniforms. Behind them, the stage curtain was drawn closed. Across the photo's bottom margin, written in ink, the Golden Premiere, 1953. Clara traced the words with her thumb. Her heart pounded. There it was again, the phrase she'd seen in the ledger. Operation Dawnlight, the Golden Premiere. Whatever happened that night had frozen this place in time. She leaned back in the chair, holding the photograph up to the light. Outside, the afternoon sun burned through the dusty windows, illuminating Rain's face. His expression was confident, but his eyes looked wary, as if he already knew something was coming. Clara set the photo down slowly. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass frame, caught between past and present, between ruin and discovery. For the first time, she felt the faint pulse of something larger than herself, a story whispering through the cracks, begging to be heard. She didn't yet know it, but the Liberty Theatre had just begun to open its mouth, and soon it would tell her everything. As she closed the tin and tucked it under her arm, a gust of wind rattled the front doors violently, making her flinch. The sound echoed through the vast auditorium like a warning, but instead of fear, Clara felt a strange calm. The theater wasn't scaring her anymore. It was calling her deeper. She walked back toward the darkened stage, her footsteps slow, deliberate. Somewhere above her, the projector gave a faint metallic click, though no one had touched it. And in that brief moment of silence after, she knew with haunting certainty, the Liberty was not empty. It was waiting. As the evening light dimmed, the golden dust in the air shimmered and fell. The echoes of the past stirred once more, and Clara Reese, standing in the center of that decaying palace, took her first real step into its secret. The story was breathing again. After the theaters, whispers led her to the photograph tin, and the name that kept returning like a tide, Jonathan Raines. Clara stood in the dim lobby and listened to the building breathe. The wind pressed at the glass doors. The ceiling sighed with age. The past moved like a current just beneath the floorboards. She steadied herself with a palm on the concession counter and let the hush settle, as if the Liberty preferred questions asked softly. She began with light. Windows that had been blind for years opened to the scrape of her screwdriver, releasing panes of powdered glass and a soft rush of cold air. Sunlight crept in slanted bands across the lobby tile, revealing color that had been hiding under gray, a mosaic swallow, a starburst, a ribbon of teal. She followed the light like a pilgrim. Wherever it touched, she brushed and swept, uncovering small reliquaries, a brass ticket puncher, a trembling stack of Admit 1 stubs, a nickel wedged in the crack of the cash drawer, green with age. The sound of each find was crisp in the quiet, metal on wood, paper sighing, keys chiming in her pocket with each step, the one she had found in the booth knocking like a heartbeat against the others. By noon, the smell of damp velvet and old sugar had shifted to dust and air, the way rooms do when they remember how to breathe. In the office, she set the photograph of Raines upright against the ledgers, then turned the chair to face the window so light fell full across his weary eyes. She wanted him to watch her work. She wanted him to know she was paying attention. When she finally climbed again toward the projection booth, The stairwell felt narrower, the metal railing colder. At the top, she paused with her ear to the door. Nothing answered but the faint tick of settling wood. Inside, the projector sat in its posture of sleep, lens clouded, reels knotted like a fossilized nest. The air had the mineral tang of film and rust. She moved in with a deliberate care, the way one enters a chapel, and knelt by the panel she'd traced earlier, a rectangle of wall that rang hollow when she rapped it lightly with her knuckles. She tried her fingernails first, then the flathead screwdriver. Paint flaked away in thin curls. Beneath, the seam appeared more clearly, a hairline around the shape. She slid the screwdriver into the groove and pried. A gasp of stale air pushed across her face, touched with the sweetness of old oil. The panel loosened and tilted, catching on a hidden hinge. Behind it, darkness and the suggestion of depth. She lifted her flashlight. The beam slipped into a narrow cavity, illuminating a short passage hardly wider than her shoulders and faced in concrete. Halfway down, metal gleamed. A second door, low and thick, skin of steel dulled by time. She swallowed. The air here was colder. Even sound seemed to hush itself. She approached on cautious steps, careful not to disturb the detritus, a feather, a dried spider husk, a screw that had frozen to the floor with rust. The door bore an oval plate at eye level, grimed nearly black. She wiped it with her sleeve until the letters appeared, shallow but insistent. J.R. Her throat tightened. The same knife, cut initials on the other lock, the same signature scratched into the theater's bones. She held the brass key she'd found earlier until its teeth pressed her palm, then fit it to the keyway out of instinct before she could overthink it. It slid in with a reluctant scrape, stopped, then seated fully with a small metallic breath. She didn't turn it, not yet. Her hand hovered on the cool weight. A low tremor rose up her arm as if the door were a living thing that could feel her touch. Behind her, the projector gave a soft, settling click, metal speaking to metal. She glanced back, pulse quickening, then laughed once under her breath at her own jumpiness. The laugh died quickly in the narrow passage. Sound did not want to linger here. She stepped back from the lock and forced herself to slow down. A mystery this dense did not reward rushing. The photograph, the ledger ending at Operation Dawnlight, the military men flanking Rains, the town's memory cut clean on a single night. She needed a line that connected more than the theater's secret geometry. She needed someone older than the dust. The library answered with a smell as old as paper knows how to be. The local history room was ringed with binders and brittle newsprint mounted in plastic sleeves. A librarian with hair like spun silver showed her the microfilm machine with a small, kind caution, as if she were handing Clara a device that could harm if mishandled. The reels hummed to life. Black strips of time slid under light, pages flickering, promotions for the Liberties matinees, spotlights on high school plays, ads for the diner's blue plate special. The golden premiere appeared 3 weeks out in bold type, then 2, then 1, a drumbeat promising glamour after a long post, wore grey. The week after that, the paper went quiet on the theater entirely. A new grocery ad took its place. The absence stood out like a tooth pulled clean from a smile. She widened the search and found the town columnist had written a single oblique sentence in A Notes and Notions. Sidebar: on the Monday following the premiere date, odd goings on at the Liberty after hours. Some light should be shed on what flickers in the dark. And then nothing more, as if a hand had removed the rest. Clara's fingers hovered over the machine's controls. On the next reel, an unrelated notice about federal inspectors visiting local businesses flickered by, and her spine offered a chill she could neither justify nor ignore. Light equals truth. Someone had switched something off. The historian met her in the afternoon, a man whose skin had browned to leather and whose voice carried the soft rhythm of lived years. He let her speak first. When she finished, he folded his hands like a book closing. "Jonathan Rains," he said, tasting the name. "War contracts, film shipments. He brought soldiers to town, sometimes always had a guard on the booth when he screened his private reels. Folks liked the glamour, didn't ask questions for fear of losing it." "Operation Dawnlight?" Clara asked. He shook his head once, only ever heard it in a whisper. "Came and went fast. Some said the projector showed more than movies. Some said it pointed to places you weren't supposed to see." His eyes softened. "Careful with old secrets. They carry their time with them." She thanked him, copied what she could, and left with the weight of his caution settling like dust on her coat. Outside, the sky had shifted to pewter. A hush fell across the street, the way it does before weather turns. As she drove back to the Liberty, the town seemed to lean inward, storefronts watching like lined faces peering through glass. She did not answer that look with bravado. She answered with purpose. Back in the lobby, she placed the historian's photocopies beside the ledger and the photograph, a small altar of evidence in a building that preferred offerings of silence. The light had thinned to late afternoon blue. She carried it with her up the stairs in the glow of her flashlight and the whisper of her breath. The panel gaped in the booth wall like a mouth that had forgotten how to close. She squeezed through again, the concrete brushing her shoulders. At the steel door, she let the brass key rest against the lock and thought of simple things. Ethan's last glance that morning, the way his skepticism was only fear dressed as logic. The rent due next week. The sour taste of courthouse coffee and the clean snap of the auctioneer's gavel. The word Liberty missing half its letters but refusing to fall. She turned the key. The lock did not yield so much as consider. Metal against metal gave a slow groan, a sound like ice shifting on a winter lake. The bolt slid back half, then more than caught. She eased pressure, reversed, tried again. On the third attempt it completed its journey with a decisive thunk that carried through the door and down her bones. She lifted the latch. The seal broke with a sigh that smelled of coin and oil and long, closed rooms. She did not open the door. Instead, she stood with her palm on it and let the cold of the steel climb into her skin until her breathing steadied. Not fear, not exactly, respect. The theater had bent the air around this place for 70 years. It could spare one more minute for a boundary to be acknowledged. When she stepped back, the beam of her flashlight brushed a line etched low on the surface. Not the initials. Smaller, finer, like a jeweler's hand, a sunburst engraved in a circle, rays radiating in precise measure. Dawnlight. She traced it with the tip of her finger until the pattern warmed under her touch. The door seemed to absorb the light and hold it. A draft touched her hair, a slow exhale from the opening panel behind. The projector clicked again, not mechanical this time. She was almost sure, but responsive, as if recognizing a sequence kept secret for decades. The booth window framed the auditorium in a deepening blue. The torn screen, pricked with holes like a constellation, caught the last of the day and gave it back as a pale veil. She could almost see the room full, the shimmer across lacquered hair, the rustle of programs, the soft cough of nerves held in check before a big moment. She made herself close the panel for now, settle the loose screws in a pile like coins, and descend. She found a chair mid-aisle and sat facing the screen, the way an audience member would have on the night a promise was made and quickly broken. Above her, the ceiling mural saints, caught in fading gold, watched without judgment. The room was honest about what it had been and what it had failed to finish. She rested her hands on her knees and allowed a single tear to thread down her cheek, not for grief, but for the simple relief of finding something to do that felt like it belonged to her. The sound that followed came from the lobby, a faint shuffle, then the almost inaudible click of the front door easing against its latch. She held still, listening hard enough to hear her pulse. Silence returned. The building tucked its breath back into itself. She rose and walked the aisle with care. At the threshold she discovered nothing but a thin skid of grit on the tile, like a footprint smudged by wind. The outside air smelled of rain not yet arrived. She turned the deadbolt, slid the chain, and spoke once to the empty lobby in a low voice that felt more like a vow than a defense. "I'm not going anywhere." Back in the booth she catalogued the reels with quick, precise strokes of her pen across a notebook page. Unlabeled, newsreel, local ads, premiere night. She paused at the last, the words carrying a gravity she could feel along her wrists. The projector's belts were dry, its wiring brittle as old ivy, but these things could be coaxed awake. Light remembers the way forward when given a path. She laid the brass key on the work table and lined up tools she would need tomorrow. Oil, cloth, a brush fine enough to lift dust from the lens without scratching, courage enough to thread a film with unknown consequences. The door behind the panel would remain shut until the machine of memory could show her what had demanded a lock. Truth, then threshold, light first, then the steel. As twilight seeped into the booth, the theater took on that liminal hum buildings get when day gives up its last coin of brightness. She whispered a good night without meaning to, palm grazing the projector's chassis as if reassuring a patient before surgery. Downstairs she extinguished her light and let the half-open windows breathe cool air through velvet darkness. The smell of rain drew nearer, promising a storm that would rinse the town's roofs and leave everything sharp and quiet. On her way out, she paused beneath the broken marquee and looked up at the voids where letters had once hung. The sky beyond it had the color of old pewter, and in that reflective gray she glimpsed her own outline, small, stubborn, still standing. She locked the door and listened one last time to the interior hush, not lonely now but attentive, like a room waiting for the audience to settle before the first frame flickers. Tomorrow she would clean the lens until it caught the morning, thread the reel labeled Premiere Night, and ask the projector to speak. And when light poured through the dust like a river turning gold, she would finally turn the cold steel handle behind the wall and see what the liberty had guarded with initials, whispers, and time. As the night deepened, she realized the story was only beginning. Rain had fallen through the night, washing the town clean, leaving the streets slick and glistening like mirrors. By the time Clara returned to the Liberty the next morning, fog had settled low, curling around the marquis's skeletal frame like breath. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The theater greeted her with silence, a silence that didn't feel empty anymore. It felt aware. She had spent half the night studying the photograph of Jonathan Rains, the man who seemed to haunt every corner of this building. The look in his eyes confident, yet uneasy, refused to leave her. He wasn't just an owner, he was guarding something, and now Clara couldn't stop herself from chasing it. The flashlight beam swept over the walls as she made her way toward the projection booth again. The stairs creaked beneath her, complaining in long, aching groans. In her hand she carried a can of oil, a cloth, and a notebook filled with half-legible theories, fragments of history, stitched together with desperation and curiosity. The projector loomed in the half, light like a sentry that had seen too much. Its body was rusted and cold, its lens filmed over by decades of neglect, but to Clara it wasn't a machine, it was a witness. She ran her fingers over the brass nameplate, Rains & Co., Cinema Systems. Her thumb brushed the engraved initials again, J.R., the same mark that sealed the door in the wall, the same signature echoing through time. The old reels sat stacked nearby, silent sentinels of forgotten light. Some were labeled in careful handwriting, others not at all. Premiere night, newsreel 1949, Operation Dawnlight. The words burned in her memory, whispering like prayers she didn't yet understand. She took a deep breath, sat at the old stool, and began cleaning. Each wipe of the cloth revealed the faint shimmer of glass beneath the dust. The smell of oil filled the air, sharp and metallic. Slowly, the projector began to resemble something alive again, as if light might still remember its way through it. Clara replaced the worn belt with one she'd ordered online, unsure if it would fit but hopeful. When she finally found the switch panel, she hesitated. 1,000 small thoughts fluttered through her. What if it shorts? What if the film burns? What if this is all just an illusion? But curiosity had always been stronger than fear. She flipped the switch. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the machine gave a faint hum, the hesitant sound of something waking after a very long sleep. The fan blades turned once, twice, then caught rhythm. A beam of light sputtered from the lens, scattering dust into a golden storm. Clara stepped back, breath caught in her throat. The light was faint, uneven, but alive. She felt the hairs on her arms rise. She loaded one of the reels, a small, brittle one labeled Premiere Night. The celluloid trembled in her hands like thin, fragile skin. She threaded it carefully, just as her father had once shown her in an old drive-in projector decades ago. When the reel began to spin, the first flickers appeared on the torn screen below. Grainy images, jittering ghosts, a crowd in suits and dresses, camera flashes, the glow of chandeliers, applause without sound, laughter frozen in black and white. Her eyes widened. The Liberty was alive again, if only for a moment. She watched as people filled the frame, stepping out of cars, greeting one another with champagne smiles. Then there he was, Jonathan Rains, younger, standing at the center of it all. He faced the camera directly, his expression distant, serious. In the background, a curtain rippled slightly, the same stage, curtain Clara had touched the day before. But then something shifted. The reel flickered, distorted, frames tearing in quick flashes. The image jumped to the projector room, this very room. She saw the same angle she stood in now, but from behind the lens. Men were hauling heavy crates into the corner, prying up floor panels, sealing something beneath. Her breath hitched. The image cut again, the faces of two men arguing, one pointing toward the camera, the other shaking his head. Then the footage stuttered, blinding light filled the frame, and the reel snapped, flapping wildly until the machine ground to a stop. Silence. Only the faint hiss of the motor remained, a dying heartbeat. Clara stood frozen, her pulse racing, the air heavy with static. She reached forward to stop the reel's spin, her hands trembling. What she'd just seen didn't make sense. Crates in the booth, a hidden floor. Rains himself. She sank onto the stool, staring at the projector as if it might explain itself. "What were you doing, Jonathan?" she whispered. "What did you hide here?" Her eyes flicked toward the wall, the panel she had opened, the steel door sealed with the sunburst emblem. Beneath her, she imagined the crates from the footage resting in the dark, undisturbed for 70 years. She stood, driven by something electric, part fear, part fascination. The film strip dangled from the machine, torn at its edge. She picked it up and held it toward the light. The final frame, though burned, showed a blurred image. A man's hand resting on the crate lid. Faintly visible, even through the damage, were letters stenciled in white paint. She squinted. U.S. Trias, the rest was gone. The hum of the projector dimmed to silence, leaving only her breathing and the faint patter of rain outside. The sound felt like a pulse syncing with her own, the rhythm of discovery and danger intertwining. She wrote furiously in her notebook, evidence of Rains, crates hidden behind projector wall, possible connection to government property, Confirm. Operation Dawnlight. Her handwriting trembled with adrenaline. Then came a noise faint but sharp from below, the echo of a door closing. Clara froze. Her pulse leapt to her throat. She stepped quietly to the booth window and peered down into the lobby. The golden afternoon light had dimmed. The shadows had lengthened. Through the cracked glass she saw movement, a shape near the entrance, human, slow. Her mind raced. No one else should be here. She'd locked the doors. She turned off the projector light, plunging the booth into near darkness, and crouched low. The only illumination came from the faint glow of the outside street lamps filtering through broken windows. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, they moved across the lobby tile toward the main hall. The sound of a shoe scuffing, then silence. Clara held her breath, heart hammering in her chest. Her eyes adjusted slowly enough to catch the faint outline of a figure standing below the balcony, head tilted upward. For an instant, she thought the person might be looking right at her. Then the voice came, calm, male, unfamiliar. "Beautiful place, isn't it?" She stiffened. The voice drifted up again, smooth as oil. "Shame what time does to things like this." Clara didn't move, didn't answer. The footsteps turned and began walking toward the projection stairs. Her mind screamed to run, to hide, but her body wouldn't listen. Every creak of the staircase vibrated through her ribs. Whoever he was coming closer. And when the first shadow fell across the booth door, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever he was, he hadn't come to admire the view. As the dim light flickered across the projector lens, the Liberty seemed to hold its breath, and Clara Reese, gripping the edge of the stool, realized that the secrets buried behind its walls were no longer hers alone. The story was changing hands. The booth door creaked under the weight of a cautious hand. Clara stepped back instinctively, the faint light from the projector beam glinting off the sweat on her forehead. The shadow paused just outside, long and deliberate, stretching across the wooden floor like a dark blade. "Don't be startled," the man said softly. His tone was calm, too calm, the kind that hid more than it revealed. "I didn't mean to intrude." Clara's pulse hammered, the theaters closed. She managed her voice low, steady only because she willed it to be. He stepped into view, middle-aged, sharply dressed, but rain-soaked from outside. His coat was tailored, his shoes far too clean for a place like this. He offered a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Closed, yes. Abandoned, not quite. "You're the new owner, I hear," she nodded slowly. "And you are?" He extended a gloved hand. "Just an archivist. Name's Leland Shaw. I collect and restore old film artifacts. When word spread about the Liberty changing hands, I thought I'd stop by. There are certain reels rumored to have been produced here, historically significant, perhaps." Clara didn't take his hand. "You heard that fast." Shaw's smile flickered, controlled. "Small town, news moves quicker than light." His gaze drifted to the projector behind her, the film strip still hanging loose. "You've already begun restoration work." "I'm just cleaning," she replied. He stepped closer to the machine, inspecting its brass components with a reverent touch. Rains & Co. model, rare, these were custom, built, you know. Jonathan Rains wasn't just an exhibitor, he was an engineer, an archivist of his own kind. "You knew him, not personally," he said, eyes fixed on the lens. "But men like him leave fingerprints everywhere, especially when they hide something worth protecting." The words sent a shiver through her. She tried to sound casual. "Hide what, exactly?" He turned then, his expression unreadable. "Gold, or secrets made of it, depends on what you believe." Clara's breath hitched. "Excuse me." Shaw smiled again, softer this time, almost pitying. "I collect stories, Miss Reese, and this theater, it's built on one." He brushed a layer of dust from the projector plate and studied the sunburst emblem etched faintly into it, the same one she'd seen on the sealed steel door. Operation Dawnlight, he murmured. A name that shouldn't exist. Funny how things that shouldn't exist always find their way back into the light. Her pulse raced. He shouldn't have known that name. She hadn't told anyone. How do you know about that? She demanded. He looked at her with that same calm, almost bored detachment. Because I've been following this trail for a long time. Longer than you've owned this place. Rains wasn't just a filmmaker. He was a courier. During the last years of the war, shipments of European gold went missing, never accounted for. Some said he helped move it. Others said he hid it. And you think it's here? His eyes glinted. I don't think. I know. He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope, placing it gently on the work table. Inside were black and white photos, grainy, old, stamped with military insignia. Crates marked U.S. Treasury, a warehouse, soldiers, a younger Rain standing beside them. Clara stared, her stomach knotting. Where did you get these? Let's just say some people have been keeping these things quiet for a reason. Shaw said, lowering his voice. You stumbled onto something you don't understand yet, and that can be dangerous. Are you threatening me? Quite the opposite, he replied smoothly. I'm offering to help. He leaned on the edge of the table, casual but calculated. Let me examine the building. If I find what I'm looking for, you'll be compensated. Handsomely. More money than this place or you will ever be worth otherwise. Clara felt anger rise, sharp and hot. I'm not selling anything. You don't even know what you have, he said quietly. There are things hidden here that should never see daylight again. He glanced toward the projector wall, the one with the hollow seam. I assume you've already found it. Her throat went dry. She didn't answer. That tiny silence was enough. His expression hardened. He nodded slowly, almost respectfully. I see. Then I'll leave you to think on it. He slid a business card across the table, its embossed letters gleaming faintly in the light. Call me before you do something reckless. Curiosity is expensive. Then he turned, descending the stairs with quiet precision. His footsteps echoed through the empty theater until the front door groaned open, then shut again with a hollow thud. Clara stood frozen. The smell of his cologne, faint and chemical, lingered in the air like an afterthought. She picked up the card. It read, Leland Shaw Film Preservation and Historical Acquisitions, a phone number, nothing else. Her hands trembled as she set it down. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The light from the booth window dimmed. For a long time, she stood staring at the projector, the machine that had just thrown open a door to the past and now, apparently, to danger. She replayed the reel's images in her mind, the crates, the hidden wall, the symbols, the flash of a hand stenciled with U.S. Trias, and now this stranger, appearing just hours after she'd seen it. Coincidence was dead. She sat down heavily, mind racing. If Shaw was right, if the theater really did hide gold, then she wasn't just restoring a building. She was sitting on something people would kill to possess. The air inside the booth felt different now, charged, hostile, alive. She turned the projector lens toward her reflection in the glass. The round, blank eye of it stared back, a silent witness to everything. Beneath the hum of the storm, she thought she could almost hear something else, a faint, rhythmic tapping from behind the steel door. She froze, listening. Tap, pause, tap, tap, like metal against metal. Her hand moved toward the door handle before she realized it. Her breath came shallow, heartbeats pounding in her ears. She pressed her palm against the cold steel. It vibrated faintly, but enough to feel. Someone or something was on the other side. She jerked back, stumbling against the table. The tapping stopped. Only silence remained. The thunder cracked outside, shaking the windows. Clara stared at the door, her pulse roaring in her ears. The steel surface reflected the faint glow of the projector lamp, and for one impossible instant, she thought she saw movement in it. A blurred shadow just behind her shoulder. She spun around, nothing. Only dust swirling in the beam of light. Her knees nearly gave out. She grabbed the chair for balance and whispered under her breath, "You're losing it, Clara. You're just tired." But deep down, she knew fatigue wasn't the cause. Something had stirred in that wall. Something that didn't belong to the past anymore. She switched off the projector, plunging the booth into darkness. The building exhaled around her, old wood settling, walls sighing. But beneath those sounds there was another rhythm now, one that matched her own heartbeat, slow, deliberate, patient. When she finally descended the stairs, she didn't look back. The Liberty felt different, not just haunted by memory, but guarded, watching, and as she stepped out into the rain, the echo of that tapping still followed her like a message she didn't yet understand. The past had spoken, and it wanted to be heard. As the storm deepened, Clara Reese realized one truth. Whatever was hidden behind that projector wall was no longer waiting to be found, it was waking up. Morning arrived, gray and brittle, the kind of light that made the world look cold even before you stepped outside. Clara had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of the real, the crates, the faces, Rain's eyes staring directly into hers across 70 years. And over it all, the echo of that man's voice lingered. Curiosity is expensive. She'd locked the theater the night before, but the memory of those soft, deliberate footsteps on the stairs refused to fade. The way Leland Shaw had known too much, moved too easily in her space. He hadn't come to appreciate history. He'd come to claim it. Now, in the pale morning, the Liberty looked different. The fog had thinned, but a film of dew glistened across its windows like sweat. She unlocked the doors with steady hands that betrayed their tremor only after the latch gave. The hinges moaned again, lower this time, like a warning she was learning to ignore. Inside, the air was thick and unmoving. She half expected to see him standing in the lobby, waiting, but there was only silence and the faint scent of his cologne still clinging to the dust. She walked through the aisles, past the empty seats, her footsteps echoing in the hollow stillness. Every shadow looked sharper, every creak louder. She tried to tell herself the fear was irrational, but instinct doesn't lie. Something had shifted since last night. The theater didn't feel abandoned anymore, it felt occupied. When she reached the projection booth, she found the envelope he had left behind, the one with the black and white photographs of Rains and those mysterious crates. She had gone through them over and over, trying to find something she'd missed, some clue, but now she noticed something new. One of the photos, the one showing the men unloading the boxes, had developed a faint crease overnight, revealing a tiny mark near the lower corner. She lifted it closer to the light, a faint symbol, a circle split by a rising sun, the same as the one engraved on the steel door. She whispered to herself, Operation Dawnlight. The name tasted foreign, dangerous, like speaking it aloud might make it real. A sound interrupted her, a knock. 3 soft raps against the front glass door below. Clara froze. The knock came again, measured, polite. Her heart raced. She leaned over the booth railing to peer down into the lobby. The fog outside blurred the figure's face, but she could make out a tall silhouette, wet in a dark coat. Leland Shaw. He was back. For a brief second, she considered pretending she wasn't there. But curiosity or defiance made her move. She descended the steps, the wooden boards creaking underfoot, every sound magnified in the silence. When she reached the door, he was already waiting with that same half-smile, polite, disarming, practiced. "Miss Reese," he greeted smoothly, tipping his hat. "I apologize for the early hour. I wanted to ensure I hadn't unsettled you last night." Clara crossed her arms, keeping the door only halfway open. "You broke into my property. I walked into an unlocked building. He corrected mildly, "But I understand your concern." His eyes flicked past her shoulder, toward the darkened theater behind her. "I simply wanted to clarify my intentions." "I think you made them pretty clear," she said. He chuckled softly, a sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You're braver than most people who inherit old secrets. Most would have already sold this place and left town. I didn't inherit it. I bought it." Even more curious, he studied her face the way one studies a riddle they've already solved. "You saw the film, didn't you?" Her chest tightened. "What film?" "The reel you played last night," he said quietly. "The one that shouldn't exist." Her breath caught. "How do you, I know?" He interrupted. "Because I've seen it before." Silence stretched thick as smoke. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. He reached into his coat again, pulling out a small velvet pouch. From it, he withdrew a tarnished coin no larger than a silver dollar, etched with the same sunburst insignia. He held it between his fingers, letting the dull morning light catch its edges. "These were made for the Dawnlight Project," he said softly, "not for commerce, not for collection, for record. A secret that bought silence." He held it out. She didn't take it. "Rains wasn't working alone," Shaw continued. "There were others. Men who moved things, art, gold, people under the pretense of preservation. But Rains grew greedy. He filmed what he wasn't supposed to. That's why everything stopped." Clara swallowed hard. "And the crates," Shaw smiled faintly. "Let's just say they contained more than film." Her grip tightened on the doorframe. "You expect me to believe you? You could have found those photos anywhere." He sighed, pocketing the coin. "I don't expect belief, only cooperation." "Which means what, exactly?" "Let me inspect the theater," he said. "That's all. I'll handle the risk. You'll be compensated. Substantially." She stared at him, measuring the calm in his tone against the chill crawling up her neck. "And if I say no, then I imagine we'll meet again under less pleasant circumstances." The words hung in the air, not shouted, not angry, but final. Clara slowly closed the door until only a sliver of his face remained visible. His expression never changed. "Think about it," he murmured. "The truth buried here is heavier than you realize." The door clicked shut. She turned the deadbolt, then stood still, staring at his fading reflection in the glass as he walked away into the fog. For several minutes she didn't move. The stillness inside the theater pressed around her, heavy and suffocating. She could almost feel the weight of that coin still lingering in the air, that sunburst emblem, glinting with the kind of truth that ruins people. When she finally went back upstairs, the photographs lay scattered across the floor, as though stirred by an unseen hand. She knelt, gathering them, but one had fallen face down. When she flipped it over, her breath stopped. Across the back, written in faint, smeared pencil, were 4 words she hadn't noticed before. "Behind the light, safe." She stared at them, her heart pounding, the message shaking in her hands. Behind the light. Her gaze lifted to the projector, the same lens that had revealed Rain's secret. Slowly, she approached it, tracing the edge of the metal casing. Her fingertips brushed against a small latch she'd never seen before. She pulled it open. Inside was a hollow compartment, empty except for a thin, crumpled piece of film no larger than her palm. She held it to the light. The image was faint, almost erased, but she could make out a single frame. Jonathan Rains, standing beside one of the crates. Holding a ledger, a second man stood beside him, Leland Shaw. The breath fled her lungs. The edges of the room blurred, reality bending around disbelief. The photo was old, too old. Shaw hadn't aged a day. Her knees weakened, and the piece of film fluttered from her hands. Somewhere deep inside the theater, a door creaked open on its own. She turned slowly, staring into the darkness below, every instinct screaming that she wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time since she bought the liberty, Clara Reese truly understood she wasn't the one discovering the secret. The secret had found her. As the sound of footsteps echoed faintly through the hall, she whispered into the silence, "What are you?" The only answer was the faint flicker of the projector bulb, pulsing like a heartbeat, one that didn't belong to her. And in that dim, ghostly light, the past began to move again. Clara didn't leave the theater that day. She couldn't. The thought of what she'd just seen, that photograph, that impossible image of Leland Shaw standing beside Jonathan Raines in 1953, looped through her mind like a reel caught in its own frame. The air inside the Liberty felt denser, like the walls were holding their breath, waiting to see what she'd do next. Her hands trembled as she poured herself coffee from a thermos she'd brought earlier. The taste was bitter, metallic. She barely noticed. Every sound, every flicker of light drew her attention. Even the steady hum of the overhead bulb now felt alive, a frequency just low enough to rattle her nerves. She pulled the film frame closer, holding it up to the weak sunlight leaking through a cracked pane. The image refused to change. The same composition, the same calm expression on Shaw's face, as though he knew she'd one day find it. It wasn't possible, not physically, not humanly. The clock above the concession stand ticked softly, each second louder than the last, behind the light safe. The message on the back of the photograph replayed in her mind like a command, but she'd already found the compartment behind the projector. It was empty, wasn't it? Her flashlight beam swept across the booth again, catching the silver dust that shimmered midair. She crouched beside the machine, running her fingers along every seam, every groove, and then, just below the base of the frame holder, her nail snagged on something, a second latch, smaller, nearly invisible. Her breath caught. She hesitated, fingers trembling over the metal edge. Then she pulled. A faint click echoed in the room. The bottom panel popped loose, revealing a small cavity lined with felt. Inside, wrapped in crumbling cloth, was a leather-bound ledger. Clara exhaled sharply, her pulse pounding in her ears. She lifted it carefully, brushing away the dust. The cover was embossed with the same emblem, the rising sunburst. The title, etched faintly in gold, read, "Dawnlight Inventory." Her mouth went dry. She sat at the work table and began turning the brittle pages. Each one was numbered meticulously, written in Raines' hand, neat, calculated. Lists of dates, coded shipments, and strange designations, DL1, DL2, DL3. Next to each a weight, gold bars, silver ingots. Artifacts, dozens of entries, hundreds, but near the end, the handwriting changed. The letters grew frantic, jagged, as if written by a shaking hand. "They're coming for it. I sealed the final vault. No one can be trusted. The light must never fall wrong, they'll see." Clara whispered the words aloud. The light must never fall wrong. What did that mean? She turned the next page. It was blank except for one single sentence scrawled diagonally across it. "Shaw knows." The sound of her own heartbeat was deafening. She slammed the book shut and stumbled back from the table. Her breath came in shallow bursts. The walls felt closer now, as if the building were leaning in to listen. Then a sound, not thunder, not wind, a phone ringing. She spun toward the noise. It came from the office downstairs, the old rotary phone she'd never plugged in, the one still hanging from the wall behind the ticket counter. The shrill tones sliced through the stillness, each ring pulling her closer. She moved down the staircase, her footsteps muffled against the carpet. When she reached the lobby, the ringing stopped. Silence. She stared at the phone, her reflection warped in its cracked surface. Her hand hovered over the receiver, hesitant. It rang again. She jumped. With trembling fingers, she lifted it. "Hello." A pause, then that voice, calm, smooth, familiar. "I told you not to rush," Shaw said. "Curiosity never ends well." Her throat went dry. How are you calling this number? It's disconnected." "Some lines," he said, almost amused. Never die. She gripped the receiver tighter. What do you want? To help you? He said simply. You've found the ledger, good. But you don't understand what you're holding. That book isn't proof of fortune. It's evidence, and people would rather erase evidence than share it. Who are you? She snapped. You're in that photograph, from 1953. You haven't aged. Another pause, a slow exhale on the line. Clara, he said softly, her name like silk and smoke. Some men serve history, others endure it. The line went dead. The dial tone's low hum bled into the silence like a heartbeat. Clara lowered the receiver slowly, her body trembling from adrenaline. She felt suddenly exposed, as if eyes were on her from every dark corner of the theater. She ran her hand across her forehead, forcing herself to breathe. She needed to leave to think, but as she turned toward the exit, a soft metallic clang echoed from the projection booth above. Something or someone had moved. She grabbed her flashlight and started up the stairs, every muscle screaming for her to turn back. When she reached the booth, the first thing she noticed was the projector's light flickering again, though she hadn't turned it on. The beam wasn't steady. It pulsed irregular, alive. It pointed directly at the steel door, and then she saw it. The ledger lay open again, though she'd closed it. The pages fluttered on their own in the faint wind from the broken window, stopping on one near the center. A new message had appeared, written in ink still wet, glistening under the light. Don't open it until the light shows you the way. Her breath hitched. She stepped closer, reading it again, her voice barely a whisper. Until the light shows me. The projector flickered violently. For a moment, the beam hit the steel door at just the right angle, and something happened. The sunburst emblem glowed faintly, as if reacting. Beneath it, fine lines appeared, hidden etchings forming a map, a shape, something precise and deliberate. She reached out, tracing the pattern. The metal was warm to the touch. Then, as quickly as it began, the glow faded. The light steadied. The door went cold. Clara stepped back, heart pounding, her hand trembling. She looked again at the ledger. The ink had already dried, proof that whatever force was moving through this place didn't obey time as she understood it. Outside, thunder rumbled again, closer this time. She sat on the edge of the stool, clutching the ledger to her chest. The storm rolled in like a warning, rain slashing the windows in sharp, rhythmic bursts. The Liberty Theatre was no longer just a decaying building. It was a vault, one that reacted to light, to motion, to memory itself. And now she had something that whoever they were would stop at. Nothing to reclaim. Her gaze drifted to the business card Shaw had left behind, its letters gleaming faintly where the projector's light caught it. She whispered, "If you knew Rains, what are you really?" A single bulb above her flickered once, then twice, and went dark. In the blackness she heard something faint but unmistakable, a man's quiet laugh echoing through the empty rows below. The sound wasn't coming from the booth. It was coming from the screen, and when she turned her flashlight toward it, she saw a single new image projected there, faint, ghostly, and impossibly real. Jonathan Rains, standing in the projector room, smiling, and behind him, the figure of Leland Shaw. The past and present had finally collided, and Clara Reese realized she was no longer watching history. She was inside it. As the storm raged outside, the Liberty's heart began to beat again, in light, in sound, in memory, and the door behind her hummed softly, waiting to be opened. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It fell in steady sheets, washing the town in gray, blurring streetlights in smeared halos of gold. Clara stayed inside the Liberty the entire time, sleeping little, eating less, and watching the projector light flicker like a restless pulse. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it, that image burned into her mind. Jonathan Rains and Leland Shaw, side by side, both staring at the camera as if they knew she would one day see them. The same calm eyes, the same sunburst emblem glinting faintly in the background. It didn't make sense. None of it did. but logic had stopped serving her days ago. She had read the ledger a dozen times now, each pass revealing something new, not because the words changed, but because she did. Between the coded lists and frantic scrawls, she began to understand Rain's descent. His notes shifted from organized inventories to unhinged confessions, mentions of the shipment, Dawnlight's promise, and the debt owed in gold and silence. There were sketches, too crude, mechanical drawings that looked like vault doors and projector components fused together. Some were marked with coordinates, others simply labeled Liberty. It was all connected. Rains, the theater, the gold, and Shaw. But the question wasn't how, it was why. The storm had knocked out power across town, but the Liberty's circuits still hummed, faintly alive. The generator downstairs, ancient and oil-fed, had sputtered awake that morning, unprovoked. She hadn't touched it. Now the building glowed with its own dim life, like a creature breathing through its walls. At noon, Clara sat in the projection booth surrounded by the artifacts of Rain's madness: photographs, pages, reels, the Dawnlight ledger. The air smelled of ozone and dust, the storm outside making the glass rattle in its frame. She opened her notebook, scribbling words as fast as her thoughts would form them. Jonathan Rains, 1949 to 1953, film producer turned smuggler, gold stolen during Reconstruction shipments, possible government link, Dawnlight, equals codename, Shaw present in 1953, photograph equals impossible, immortal, manipulation, the pen tore the paper, her hands were shaking. She leaned back, pressing her palms against her temples. "You're unraveling, Clara," she whispered. "You need proof, facts." So she decided to go find them. The town's small historical society sat 2 blocks from City Hall, a squat brick building with a faded banner that read "Preserving Our Heritage." Inside, it smelled of mildew and patience. An elderly volunteer greeted her with a polite nod, recognizing her as the woman who'd bought the haunted theater. Clara forced a smile. "I'm researching the Liberty's former owner, Jonathan Rains." The woman's expression changed, not fear, exactly, but discomfort. "Oh, him? You knew him? Everyone did, or thought they did. He was a celebrity around here once. Big premieres, Hollywood visitors, newsmen. The Liberty put our town on the map. Then he vanished, just before the fire." "Fire?" The woman nodded. "A small one, they said. Electrical, but it closed the theater overnight. He disappeared the next morning. No obituary, no forwarding address, nothing." Clara felt the cold crawl up her arms. Was anyone hurt? The volunteer hesitated. Some said there was a man trapped upstairs, a projectionist. Others said it was Rains himself. No one ever found a body. "Do you have any records, articles?" The woman nodded slowly, disappearing into a back room. When she returned, she carried a small, water-stained folder marked 1953 Liberty Theater Incident. Clara opened it carefully. Inside were yellowed clippings, black-on, white photos, and an official fire report. The headline read, "Local producer vanishes after theater blaze. Police suspect foul play." Beneath it, a photograph of Rains, confident, handsome, smiling, the same face from the reel, the same watch on his wrist, the same faint glint of something dark in his eyes. But then she saw the next image, a charred corner of the projection booth, burned almost beyond recognition, and yet, behind the melted machinery, something metallic gleamed through the ash. A pattern, a circle, rays extending outward, the sunburst. Clara's stomach turned. Was this ever investigated? The volunteer shrugged, briefly. "The police closed it within a week, said the cause was faulty wiring. Rains was presumed dead, but there were rumors." "What kind of rumors?" The woman leaned closer, her voice dropping. "People said the fire wasn't an accident. Said it started when Rains tried to destroy something, or someone tried to destroy him. Clara's pulse quickened. Who? No one knows. But 2 days later, men in dark suits came through, took boxes from the ruins. No labels, no explanations. Then the theater was sealed for good. The town moved on. Her voice softened, eyes distant. But not everyone forgets, not really. Clara thanked her and hurried out, rain soaking her coat before she reached the car. She drove back through puddled streets, mind spinning. The pieces were snapping together like shards of glass. Rains hadn't just hidden gold, he'd hidden evidence, something someone wanted erased. The fire hadn't been his end, it had been his silence. When she reached the Liberty, the rain had slowed to a mist. The building stood quiet and damp, the marquee letters glistening like tears. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her, the click echoing through the empty lobby. The smell of old film and smoke filled her lungs. In the booth, she spread out the fire photos beside Rain's ledger. Each image lined up perfectly with the sketches inside the blueprints of hidden vaults, chambers, passageways. The steel door she'd found wasn't just storage, it was the vault. She placed a trembling hand on the projector, the metal cold beneath her skin. The last entry in the ledger whispered through her memory, "They're coming for it. The light must never fall wrong." She turned toward the steel door. The faint outline of the sunburst symbol seemed to shimmer under the dim light, as though remembering the fire that had tried to erase it. Then a sound, soft, faint, a whisper, almost too quiet to be real. It came from behind the door. Clara stepped closer, holding her breath. The whisper grew clearer, the rasp of air through dust. It wasn't a voice she could understand, but it carried rhythm, cadence, almost like words replaying from an old reel. She pressed her ear against the cold steel. Light, truth, burn. She stumbled back, heart hammering, her hand flying to her mouth. The voice stopped. The projector, untouched, clicked once as if acknowledging what she'd just heard. She turned to face it, her breath shallow. "Jonathan," she whispered, "are you?" The bulb flared to life. A beam cut through the dark, projecting directly onto the opposite wall, not the screen, not the floor, but the bare plaster near the exit. There, in grainy black and white, a figure appeared. Jonathan Rains, his face half shadowed, his mouth moving silently as the film jittered. The footage wasn't one she'd loaded, she hadn't even touched the machine. It was coming from nowhere. The lips moved again, faster now. A single word flickered in the subtitles, burned into the film's bottom edge. "Run." The image burned out in a flash of white, leaving Clara blind for a moment. When her vision returned, she was alone again, but the air had changed. The theater no longer felt dormant, it was awake, watching, and somewhere, beneath the cracked floors and walls, gold wasn't the only thing buried. Jonathan Rains hadn't died in that fire. He was still here, waiting for her to finish the story he'd started. As thunder rolled across the sky, Clara stood trembling in the projector's fading glow, realizing that what haunted the Liberty wasn't a ghost at all, it was unfinished truth. And truth, she now understood, doesn't rest in peace. The next morning broke in a sickly grey light, the kind that carried no warmth, only warning. The storm had passed, but the sky still hung heavy, thick with something that felt unfinished, like the air before another strike. Clara stood at the theater entrance, key trembling in her hand, watching her reflection in the glass. Her face looked older, sharper, different. The kind of change that happens when you start to see what was never meant to be seen. She turned the key and stepped inside. The Liberty was colder than usual, the kind of cold that felt intentional, as if the building had exhaled all warmth overnight. The scent of smoke and oil lingered faintly in the air, like a memory that refused to fade. The projector room loomed above her, dark and silent. The night before, it had shown her something impossible, a message from dead, a warning that defied logic. Run, but Clara wasn't running. She couldn't. She climbed the narrow stairway slowly, each step groaning beneath her weight. The booth door creaked open with its usual sigh, and the faint metallic smell met her like a greeting. The reel from last night still hung in the projector's teeth, though she hadn't loaded one. Her flashlight flicked on, the beam cutting through dust motes drifting like ash. The Dawnlight ledger lay open on the table, the words "Sure Knows" underlined in streaks of smeared ink. Next to it, the fire photographs glimmered faintly where the storm's dim light slipped through the windows. Clara sat down on the stool, exhaling shakily. "All right, Jonathan," she whispered. "Let's finish what you started." She pulled the fire report closer, studying the printed coordinates at the bottom: 41 degrees 36, 91 degrees 31, the location of the Liberty itself. But beneath it, handwritten in a faint scrawl, another set of numbers was circled, smaller, lighter, almost an afterthought. She copied them into her notebook, reading them aloud: 41 degrees 38, 91 degrees 29. The coordinates led somewhere northeast, close enough to drive. Her mind flickered back to Shaw's words. Raines wasn't alone. He was part of something. The realization settled heavy in her chest. If Raines hid the gold, maybe it wasn't all here. Maybe the Liberty was just one piece of a larger vault, a decoy or a map. She rose and began pacing, her shoes crunching on fragments of glass. The walls around her seemed to hum, the faint vibration traveling through her fingertips when she brushed the steel door. She crouched near it, tracing the engraved sunburst with her thumb. "Light must never fall wrong," she murmured. She shone the flashlight directly onto the symbol. The metal responded subtly but unmistakably. The sunburst glowed faintly again, and beneath it, the faintest outline of words appeared: "To those who carry the dawn, beware its shadow." Her breath caught. "Shadow," she whispered. The bulb in her flashlight flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed the booth. Her heart thudded in her throat. No, no. She hit the flashlight casing once, twice, but it stayed dead. Then, from the far side of the booth, the projector sparked to life. A flicker, a hum. The reel began to spin slowly, hesitantly, and light spilled across the cracked glass window, painting the wall with moving ghosts. Clara stepped closer, shielding her eyes. The image sharpened. The Liberty Theater, exactly as it looked now, but alive. Crowds filled the seats, dressed in suits and gowns. A banner hung across the stage. The golden premiere operation, Dawnlight. Her throat tightened. Oh my God. The film moved like a dream, soundless but vivid. She could almost smell the perfume, the popcorn, the buzz of electricity that came with a full house. Then the camera panned, and there he was. Jonathan Raines, standing at the podium, hands raised, smiling. At his guests, he began speaking, his mouth moving quickly. There were no subtitles, no audio, but Clara could feel his urgency. Something wasn't right. Behind him, a few men exchanged glances, stiff and nervous. Then a flash, the image distorted, screams, blurred shapes running. Smoke filled the frame, curling upward from the stage. The reel stuttered, burning at the edges. Clara stumbled back, covering her mouth as the film melted in real time, the acrid scent of scorched celluloid filling the booth. The projector sputtered, flickered, and then went black. For a few seconds, all she could hear was the hiss of the burning film, and then, beneath it, another sound: footsteps, coming from the hall below. Clara froze. Her eyes darted toward the stairwell. The rhythm of the steps was slow, deliberate, unmistakably human. She grabbed the flashlight again, shaking it until it came to life. The beam wavered, catching only fragments of the stairwell below. "Hello," she called out. No answer. She moved to the top of the stairs, her voice sharper this time. "Who's there?" Still nothing. Then a single voice rose from the dark below, low, steady, familiar. "You shouldn't have played it." Her blood went cold. Leland Shaw stepped into view, his coat dripping rain onto the steps. His expression was calm, but his eyes gleamed with something feral behind them. "I told you some things were meant to stay buried." Clara gripped the railing, How did you get in here? He smiled faintly. Doors are for people who need permission. She took a step back. You saw the film, didn't you? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around the booth, his gaze settling on the ledger. So, you've been busy. She glared. You were there, Shaw, in 1953. You stood beside Rains. He tilted his head, the smirk fading into something colder. Rains had vision, he said softly. He wanted to preserve something that should have died in the fire. But vision without discipline burns everything around it. What was Dawnlight? Clara demanded. Insurance, he replied. A secret for a world that wasn't ready for truth. Truth about what? About value, Shaw said, taking a slow step closer. Gold was the distraction. What mattered was what it funded: an experiment in power, light, and loyalty. The kind of truth men build governments to hide. Her pulse raced, and Rains tried to expose it. He smiled again, almost proudly. He filmed what he wasn't supposed to. The premiere wasn't a screening. It was a test. He thought he could control it. Control what? The light. The words sent a chill crawling through her spine. Rains called it Dawnlight. Shaw continued, his voice lowering. A device hidden in the projector's design, a way to harness energy, refract it into gold frequencies. It was supposed to create endless wealth. Instead, it created ghosts. Clara's breath hitched. Ghosts, he nodded slowly. You've seen them. The images that move when no reel is playing. The voices that speak without air. The Liberty was never haunted, Miss Reese. It's alive. Silence pressed thick between them. Clara's gaze flicked to the steel door. The humming had returned, soft, resonant, almost like breathing. Shaw followed her eyes and smiled knowingly. Rains sealed it for a reason, he said. He tried to bury the heart of Dawnlight before it consumed everything. Clara shook her head, backing toward the door. And you want to open it? He shrugged. Want is the wrong word, need is closer. I'm not letting you touch it. He smiled, almost pitying. You don't have a choice. Lightning flashed outside, throwing white light across his face. For a split second, she saw something impossible. His reflection in the booth window didn't match his movements. It lagged, delayed, as if time itself hesitated around him. Shaw's eyes caught hers. You see it now, don't you? What the light does, what it takes to stay inside it. She felt her back hit the steel door, cold and solid. Her hand brushed the sunburst emblem, and the lines began to glow faintly again, reacting to her touch. Shaw took another step forward, lowering his voice. Open it, Clara. Let it finish what it started. She shook her head violently. No. Then it will open for you. Before she could react, the projector behind him roared to life again, blinding light flooding the booth. The reel spun wildly, unwound film whipping through the air. The entire room vibrated. The steel door behind her groaned, a deep metallic rumble like a vault awakening from sleep. Shaw's face flickered in the strobe of the projector beam, half real, half reflection. He raised his voice over the hum. Rains failed because he hesitated. Don't make his mistake. Clara screamed as the door flared with golden light, the symbol searing against her palm. The last thing she saw before everything went white was Shaw's faint smile, the same one captured in that decades-old photograph. Then darkness. When Clara opened her eyes, the light was gone. Projector was dead. The door was closed. Shaw had vanished. But something new lay at her feet, a single gold coin, warm to the touch, engraved with the same sunburst emblem, and etched along its edge, barely visible, were 4 chilling words. Light never dies, Clara. As the rain began again outside, she realized what she had awakened was no longer history, it was consequence. The Liberty was alive, and now, so was the secret. Dawn came muted and uncertain, filtered through low clouds that swallowed the sky. Clara hadn't slept. She sat in her car, parked across the street from the Liberty Theater, hands wrapped around a paper cup of cold coffee, staring at the building's dark silhouette. The marquee letters hung loose in the wind, clattering faintly, a sound that, in the emptiness of morning, felt almost alive. She could still feel the burn on her palm from where the sunburst symbol had seared her. The mark had faded overnight, but the ache remained, not pain exactly, more like the echo of heat. A whisper that refused to leave her skin. Inside her mind, the night replayed in fragments. Shaw's voice, calm, steady, inhuman, saying, "Light never dies." The explosion of the projector's beam, the door's glow, the golden coin that appeared where he'd stood. She had turned it over again and again through the long hours before sunrise. The inscription, carved along its edge, was perfectly deliberate. "Light never dies, Clara." He'd known she'd find it, he'd wanted her to, and though every instinct in her screamed to walk away, she couldn't. The Liberty had become something more than a place. It was a pulse, a presence. Every answer she needed was sealed behind that door, the one that had been waiting for 70 years. By mid-morning, she was inside again. The lobby was drenched in pale light, every corner sharp and cold. The silence pressed against her ears until even the soft scuff of her boots sounded invasive. She carried a crowbar, a flashlight, and her son's old Polaroid camera, tools of desperation. Of proof, when she climbed the stairs, the projector room greeted her like a confession chamber. Dust swirled in the sunlight, slanting through the cracked window, and the air felt charged, as if the building knew what she'd come to do. The smell of ozone lingered faintly, a memory of the light that had nearly consumed her. The gold coin sat exactly where she'd left it on the table. It caught the sunlight, gleaming with that uncanny warmth that didn't seem to fade. She reached for it, hesitated, then pocketed it. "If you want me to find it," she muttered, "then I'll find it on my terms." Her gaze drifted toward the steel door. The surface had dulled again, the sunburst symbol now faint, barely visible, but she could still feel it humming faintly when she got close, like a living thing just beneath the surface. Clara set down her bag, gripping the crowbar with both hands. Old bolts at the hinges were thick with rust. She wedged the metal between them, prying slowly, each groan of the steel echoing through the booth. Sweat rolled down her temple despite the chill. When the first bolt gave, it sounded like a gasp. She paused, breath shaking. "All right," she whispered to herself. "No turning back." The second bolt snapped, then the third. As the last hinge gave way, a deep vibration rippled through the floor, subtle but real. The projector shuddered on its base, glass rattling in the frame. She stepped back, heart pounding. "It's just pressure," she told herself. "Just air trapped for decades." But when she placed her hand on the door again, the metal was warm, not from friction, from something deeper. The latch resisted once, then turned with a slow, grinding twist. The seal broke. A sigh, not mechanical, but almost organic, drifted out, carrying with it a wave of cold air that smelled of stone, earth, and time. Clara lifted her flashlight, its beam slicing into the darkness beyond. A narrow staircase descended into the depths, walls of concrete slick with condensation. The air shimmered faintly, thick with particles that looked like dust, but glowed softly under the light. She hesitated at the threshold, the enormity of the moment pressing down on her. The air was heavy with something ancient, something that felt older than the theater itself. Behind her, the projector clicked once, then fell silent again. "Jonathan," she murmured, "what did you bury down here?" She stepped inside. The air was colder immediately, the temperature dropping with each stair. Her flashlight beam danced across the narrow corridor, revealing walls etched with faint symbols, sunbursts, circles, and strange alchemical markings she couldn't recognize. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage widened into a low-ceilinged chamber. The floor was covered in a layer of fine dust that glittered faintly in the beam like powdered gold. Crates lined the walls, old, rusted, their wood swollen with age. She knelt beside the nearest one. The markings on the side were faint, but still visible. U.S. Treasury restricted. Her breath caught. She brushed the lid clean, running her fingers along the stenciled letters. The crate's metal clasps were fused shut, but a small portion had splintered open from age. She pried it gently until a corner gave way. The smell of oil and decay filled the air. Inside, wrapped in cracked canvas, something metallic gleamed. She reached in, her fingers trembling, and lifted it slightly. A gold bar, heavy, cold, real. Her heart hammered as she stared at it. Decades of myth, rumor, obsession, all of it was true. But as she turned the bar over, she froze. Stamped into the underside was not a mint mark, but an emblem, the same sunburst sigil. Beneath it, in small letters, Dawnlight. Clara's chest tightened. This wasn't treasure, this was manufactured. Her light moved across the room, catching more crates, dozens of them, all marked the same way. She staggered backward, the enormity of it crashing down. This was no simple theft. This was an operation, a vault of gold born, not of greed but of experiment. Something rustled behind her. She spun, flashlight jerking wildly across the chamber. Nothing. The silence pressed in again, thicker now. But then she noticed something on the far wall, a shape, faint and shifting, like a shadow that didn't belong. She approached it. Slowly, the beam steadied on it and her stomach twisted. It was a projection, a flicker of light forming from nowhere, dancing across the concrete. Faint, unstable, but undeniably human-shaped. Jonathan Rains. He stood motionless, hands clasped behind his back, his expression calm, eyes glowing faintly with reflected light. His lips moved, and though no sound came, she understood the words, "You weren't supposed to open it." Clara stumbled back, breath catching in her throat. "You're not real," she whispered. The apparition tilted its head slightly, almost in pity. Then another flicker. The figure split, one image becoming two. Behind Rains, another shape appeared, Leland Shaw. They stood together, just as they had in the photographs, their faces caught between light and shadow. Clara took another step back, nearly tripping on a crate. "No," she whispered, "this isn't possible." The projection wavered, and for a moment the chamber walls seemed to glow, faint veins of gold pulsing like blood beneath the concrete. The air hummed, deep and rhythmic, as if the theater itself was responding. She clutched the gold bar tightly, backing toward the stairs. The light brightened. The figures moving closer, flickering faster, merging with the glow. Their voices overlapped now, distant but clear. "Rains, you've unsealed what was never yours. Sure, but it always needed you to open it." The chamber trembled, dust falling from the ceiling in thin streams. Clara turned and bolted up the stairs, her flashlight jerking wildly. The hum rose into a low roar, like machinery coming alive after decades of silence. At the top, she stumbled into the projection booth, slamming the door shut behind her. Her chest heaved as she pressed her back against it, listening, but the sound below had stopped. Only silence now. She looked down at the gold bar still clutched in her hand. In the dim light, its surface shimmered, faintly pulsing, like it was breathing. Her reflection in the brass casing trembled as she whispered to herself, "What did I just wake up?" Outside, lightning split the sky. The Liberty's neon sign flickered for the first time in 70 years, sputtering weakly to life. The building had begun to breathe again, and deep beneath her feet, the vault of dawnlight stirred, waiting for its true light to fall once more. The Liberty was no longer silent. Even when Clara stood perfectly still, she could hear it, a deep, low hum, pulsing through the floors like the sound of a far-off generator buried beneath the earth. Every beam, every inch of plaster, seemed to vibrate faintly with it, as if the theater had a heartbeat again. She stood in the projection booth, drenched in sweat despite the cold, the gold bar heavy in her trembling hands. Its surface still shimmered faintly, alive with a warmth that didn't belong to metal. Each pulse of light moved in time with that hum below. Her breath came short, fogging the air. "You're not supposed to be alive," she whispered. "You're not supposed to be anything." But the bar didn't cool. If anything, it pulsed brighter. Clara stumbled toward the work table, setting it down beside the ledger. The golden light reflected in the pages, dancing across the frantic handwriting of Jonathan Rains. She flipped to the last filled page, reading again the words that now seemed to speak directly to her. It cannot be contained. The light remembers what it touches. Her throat tightened. The meaning was beginning to take shape. The gold wasn't just hidden wealth. It was charged, altered, perhaps even alive. She turned the page. There was one more note, faint, almost erased. If the seal breaks, close the circuit. Do not let the reflection reach the screen. The reflection, she murmured, staring at the words. What does that mean? Her eyes darted toward the booth's window, the torn movie screen below, pale in the dim light. The projector sat dead, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that if she so much as looked through the lens, she would see something staring back. She shoved the ledger away, its brittle pages tearing slightly, and gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. Her heart wouldn't slow down. She couldn't stay up here, not alone. The air in the booth had grown stifling, metallic, filled with the faint scent of ozone and burning wire. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway, flashlight trembling in her hand. The sound below had changed, no longer a hum, but something deeper, breathing in uneven waves. Clara descended the stairs. Each step felt longer than the last, as if gravity were pulling at her feet. The darkness below seemed denser now, like water instead of air. She reached the bottom, the beam of her flashlight cutting across the auditorium's decaying seats. Dust swirled in faint spirals, catching some unseen current. Then she heard it again, the whisper, soft, rhythmic, almost human. She turned toward the stage. The curtain moved slightly, as though stirred by breath. The beam of her flashlight trembled over it, revealing handprints in the dust along the fabric fresh. Her pulse quickened. Who's there? No answer. She stepped closer, her shoes crunching on glass. The whispering grew louder, a chorus of half-formed words echoing through the hollow space. As she reached the stage, the flashlight flickered, once, twice, then died. Darkness fell heavy and absolute. Clara froze, the world narrowing to sound the rain outside, the faint vibration of the floorboards, and the whispering that now surrounded her from every direction. She groped for the curtain, pushing it aside, her fingers brushing cold fabric. The smell of dust and decay filled her nose. Beyond the curtain, the air was different, colder, denser. Then, faintly, a light bloomed in the distance. It came from the open stairwell she'd left behind the steel door, that impossible passage she had just escaped. The glow was gold, flickering like candlelight, but alive in a way flame never could be. No, she whispered. No, I closed it. But the door stood open again. She should have run. Every rational instinct told her to flee. Yet something deeper, something heavier, held her in place. A pull magnetic, ancient, inescapable. Clara descended the hidden stairs once more. The chamber below was no longer quiet. The hum had grown into a chorus, the gold dust rising like embers from invisible fire. The crates glowed faintly from within, light leaking through cracks in their seams. The air shimmered with heat, and in the center of the room, where there had once been only stone, now stood a single shape, the faint projection of Jonathan Rains, clearer than before. He looked younger now, less spectral. His suit was immaculate, his eyes steady. When he spoke, she heard him this time. The sound came not from his mouth, but from everywhere at once. You've awakened it? Clara swallowed, her voice breaking. What is it, Jonathan? What did you build? He stepped closer, the edges of his body flickering with light. Not a machine, not gold. Dawnlight was meant to preserve consciousness, the reflection of self through light. It was never treasure, it was containment. Her stomach dropped. You trapped something here. Rains nodded once. We trapped them, the men who tried to weaponize it. Their greed anchored them in the medium. Now the light holds their memory, their will. Clara shook her head, backing away. That's impossible. His voice lowered. Every projection needs a source. You became it when you broke the seal. The air trembled around her. Shadows twisted against the walls, forming faint outlines, faces, hands, bodies frozen mid-motion. They flickered like damaged film, struggling to hold shape. Rain's expression softened with pity. It needed a new host. The realization hit like cold steel. The glow wasn't coming from the gold anymore. It was coming from her. Her skin reflected it faintly, veins illuminated beneath the surface like threads of molten light. She gasped, clutching her arms. "No, no, you're lying." Rain's form flickered, his voice straining. "Close the circuit, Clara, before the reflection reaches the screen." The screen, his gaze lifted past her to the stairwell. "It's climbing. Once it reaches the surface, there will be no stopping it." A distant creak echoed above the groan of the projector starting on its own. Clara spun, racing up the stairs, her flashlight clattering behind her. The hum rose into a shriek, vibrating through her bones. As she reached the projection booth, the air was blinding, the projector bursting to life, its beam already aimed at the torn screen below. She lunged for the power switch. Sparks burst as she yanked it, burning her hand. The beam flickered, dimmed but didn't die. Light poured through the booth window, golden and alive, crawling down the walls like water. Shapes moved inside it. Faces, hundreds of them, whispering in a single, terrible voice. Clara screamed, slamming her palm against the lens. The light recoiled, hissing like steam, but it didn't fade. It wrapped around her arm, searing the skin, merging with the faint glow that already pulsed beneath her veins. Her vision blurred, the air shimmered, bending around her. And then, from deep within the light, she saw them, Rains and Shaw, side by side, their faces stretched thin by the glow. Rains, "End it." Shaw, "Let it finish." The voices collided in her skull. She stumbled backward, crashing into the wall, tears streaking her face. "Stop." She screamed, and the light obeyed. It burst outward, exploding through the booth window in a shower of dust and glass, flooding the theater below. Then silence. The beam vanished, the hum ceased. Only the soft patter of rain returned, steady and real. Clara lay on the floor, gasping, every nerve aflame. When she lifted her trembling hand, the glow beneath her skin was gone. Only the burn remained. She sat there for a long time, surrounded by darkness and debris, the smell of scorched metal thick in the air. Finally, she rose and looked toward the screen below. The torn fabric was blackened, burned clean through the center. Behind it, the faintest trace of light pulsed once more, not gold this time, but soft white, gentle, almost peaceful. It wasn't gone. It was waiting. And as Clara stared down into that ghostly glow, she realized the terrible truth Jonathan Rains had never written in his ledger. The light didn't just remember what it touched, it became it, and now part of her lived inside the Liberty, forever bound to the story she had unsealed. The storm outside broke into silence. Inside, the last flicker of light on the scorched screen shivered and took the faint shape of her silhouette. The morning came too soon. Clara sat at the kitchen table of her small rental house, the curtains drawn tight against the daylight. The world outside carried on like nothing had changed. Cars passing, children on bicycles, the distant hum of life that felt foreign to her now. Her hands, still marked by faint burns, trembled as she poured coffee she wouldn't drink. Every time she blinked, she saw it again, the explosion of golden light, the faces inside it, Rains whispering, "Close the circuit." But she hadn't closed anything. The light was still inside the Liberty, and somewhere deep inside, she could still feel it, a pulse that wasn't hers. On the table lay the gold bar, wrapped in a towel. It glowed faintly even through the cloth, a heartbeat she could see in rhythm with her own. She'd tried to leave it there, to walk away, to pretend it was just metal. But she couldn't. It called to her, subtle, persistent, alive. The knock came just before noon. 3 sharp raps against the door. Clara froze. No one knocked like that. Not friends, not neighbors. She moved slowly, quietly, peering through the peephole. Leland Shaw stood on the porch. He looked exactly the same, no exhaustion, no bruise, no evidence of the chaos from the night before. His clothes were dry, pressed, as if time hadn't passed for him at all. She didn't open the door. He smiled faintly through the glass. "You've been busy, Miss Reese." Her voice was thin when it finally emerged. "How did you find me? Some things don't need to be found." He said softly. "They follow their source." Her pulse pounded. "You need to leave. You took something that doesn't belong to you." His tone remained calm, conversational. "You should give it back." Clara glanced at the towel, wrapped shape on the table. It was buried, forgotten. "Not forgotten," he said, "protected." She gripped the edge of the door. "Whatever this is, it's not yours." He tilted his head, that faint, unnerving smile returning. "That's where you're wrong. It belongs to us, to the ones who remember what Rains built. You broke the seal. You made yourself a part of it." Clara's breath caught. "You were there when he built it, weren't you?" Shaw's eyes glinted. "I was there when he failed." The weight of those words filled the air between them. "Let me in," he said quietly, "before this gets worse." Clara stepped back, shaking her head. "No." He sighed. "You really don't understand what you've unleashed." He slipped a folded piece of paper through the mail slot, its edges charred like it had already been through fire. "You have until tonight. Meet me at the Liberty. Bring what you took, or they'll come for it instead." And then he was gone. No car started outside. No footsteps faded away. Just silence. Clara waited a full minute before opening the door. The porch was empty, the street deserted. Only the note remained on the floor. She picked it up with trembling fingers. The handwriting was precise, old-fashioned, like something from another century. "Return it before the light turns." Beneath the words, a faint outline of the sunburst emblem. Clara pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to think, to breathe. The air felt too thick. The hum inside her, that faint rhythm she tried to ignore, grew stronger. She could almost hear it now, like a low frequency running beneath the world's sounds. That night, she tried to rest, but sleep refused her. Images danced behind her eyes, flickers of the Liberty alive again, its halls glowing, gold seeping through the cracks in the floorboards. She heard Rain's voice, then Shaw's, overlapping until they became one. Light never dies, until it's fed. She jolted awake. The clock read 2:37 a.m. The gold bar still sat on the table. Only now, it wasn't glowing faintly. It was shining. Bright, pure, silent light poured through the towel, casting long, moving shadows across the walls. Clara stepped closer, eyes wide. No. The fabric began to smolder. She yanked it away, and the gold's surface pulsed each beat, sending a shimmer through the room like ripples in water. Her reflection in it wasn't still. It moved slower, smoother, smiling when she didn't. She stumbled back, knocking over a chair. "What do you want?" she whispered. The reflection tilted its head, her head, but not hers. Its lips moved, forming words she could barely comprehend. "Return the light." A faint sound rose in the distance, the hum of the Liberty. She shouldn't have been able to hear it from here, but she could. It was alive again, calling her home. She grabbed her coat, her car keys, her flashlight. The gold bar she wrapped in a thick blanket this time, shoving it into a box. Outside, the air was thick with fog. Streetlights glowed like drowned lanterns. The drive to the theater felt longer than it ever had before, as though the town itself had stretched, its streets bending in quiet, unseen ways. When she reached the Liberty, the neon sign, dead for decades, flickered weakly. The letter L buzzed in and out, leaving only Liberty, as if the word were mocking her, a promise that had long since lost its meaning. The door was already unlocked. Clara pushed it open slowly, stepping into the dark lobby. The smell of rain and dust filled the air. The walls trembled with that same heartbeat hum, faint but unmistakable. On the stage a single light burned, and beneath it, Leland Shaw stood waiting. He wasn't alone. Behind him, shapes moved, translucent figures, faint and shimmering, flickering in and out of visibility like bad film. Dozens of them, some in suits, some in uniforms, men and women caught between light and matter, their faces frozen mid-expression, half remembered by time. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "What did you do?" Shaw smiled. "I didn't do anything. You did. The seal was never meant to be opened. You let the light breathe again. You freed them." He gestured toward the box in her arms. "Bring it here." Clara clutched it tighter. "You want it so badly. Tell me what it is first." He sighed. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." Shaw's eyes gleamed in the golden glow. "It's memory, not of people, but of power. Dawnlight wasn't gold, it was a vessel. The bars you see are crystallized energy human consciousness made tangible. Rains tried to turn it into currency. Instead, he made immortality." Her stomach twisted. "You're saying these spirits, are what's left of those who touched it?" He finished. "Greed leaves an echo, Miss Reese, and now you've joined the chorus." The figures behind him stirred, faint outlines turning their hollow faces toward her. Clara took a step back. "You can't control it." Shaw smiled faintly. "Control, no, but I can guide it. I've done it before." She realized then that was why he hadn't aged. The light had preserved him. Fed him. Her grip on the box tightened. "Then you'll never have it again." And she turned and ran. Shaw's voice followed her, calm, unhurried, inevitable. "You can't run from what's inside you." Clara sprinted through the lobby, the hum rising behind her into a living roar. The walls shimmered, the floors breathing light. The Liberty was alive again, and it wanted her back. As she reached the doors, they slammed shut on their own. The last thing she saw before the darkness swallowed her was Shaw stepping into the beam of golden light, his smile glowing like a man finally returning home. And above them, the projector whirred to life. The Liberty was ready for its final show. The air inside the Liberty thickened until it felt like she was breathing through glass. The projector roared to life above, the sound trembling through the walls, shaking loose dust that fell like ash. The beam of light cut through the air in golden shafts, painting every surface in its haunted glow. Clara turned toward the doors, but they refused her, sealed tight, shuddering under invisible pressure. The handles burned when she touched them, heat radiating from within the brass. The building was closing itself. From the stage, Leland Shaw stood bathed in that unnatural light. His shadow didn't match his body anymore. It moved on its own, flickering, shifting, sometimes larger, sometimes smaller. The air around him warped, as though the light itself bent in his presence. "You don't understand what you're holding." He called to her, his voice echoing with strange resonance. Dawnlight was never a curse. It's salvation. Clara backed away, clutching the box tighter. The gold bar inside felt like it was burning through the blanket, its heat pulsing against her ribs. "You call this salvation? Look at them." She pointed to the flickering shapes behind him. Dozens of spectral forms hovered in the golden haze, each one frozen mid-motion, their mouths open as though caught in endless silent screams. Shaw didn't even glance at them. "These are remnants, fragments of what was left when the human mind touched eternity. They didn't die, Clara. They were refined. They're trapped," she said, her voice cracking. "You trapped them, you and Rains." He smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth twitching upward like a man savoring a long-awaited truth. "Rains thought he was saving them. I knew better. You can't destroy light, Miss Reese. You can only contain it, or let it consume you." She took another step back. "Why me?" "Because you opened the seal. You completed the circuit." His gaze flicked toward her pocket. "You bear the mark now. The system recognized you as its next keeper." Her mind raced. The warmth in her veins, the glow beneath her skin, the way the light had responded to her touch. She had felt it, but refused to name it. Now, standing here beneath that golden beam, she understood. She had become part of the mechanism. The floor beneath her vibrated softly, a low, living hum. The walls shimmered with the faint outline of sunburst symbols, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. She whispered, "I didn't ask for this." Shaw spread his hands, stepping closer to the stage's edge. Neither did Rains, but he built something eternal, something that will outlive both of us. You can fight it, or you can take your place within it. Clara shook her head, her breath quick and shallow. "No, I'm ending it." She threw open the box, light spilling out in a blinding flare. Shaw winced, shielding his face, but his laughter came through the brilliance, soft, delighted, almost tender. "You think you can kill light?" She reached into the box and grasped the bar with both hands. It burned her skin, but she didn't let go. The glow crawled up her arms, turning her veins into golden rivers. "Maybe I can't," she said through clenched teeth, "but I can bury it again." Shaw's smile faltered. "Don't." Clara spun toward the staircase leading to the basement vault. The hum beneath the floor rose to a thunderous vibration, the theater trembling like a creature waking from sleep. Behind her, Shaw's voice grew sharper, frantic. "You don't know what you're doing." She didn't stop. Each step felt heavier, like wading through invisible resistance. The air thickened with static, the golden light chasing her down the corridor, reaching for her. The floorboards beneath her feet glowed faintly with each step, leaving footprints of light that faded slowly behind her. She reached the metal door to the hidden stairwell and tore it open. The passage below still shimmered faintly from the last time she'd descended. Gold dust suspended in the air like slow, falling snow. She ran. The hum grew louder with every step, pressing against her eardrums, vibrating through her bones. At the bottom, the vault waited. The crates glowed now, their seams splitting as beams of light leaked out, spilling across the floor in liquid gold. The projection of Jonathan Rains appeared again, clearer than before, his eyes bright, voice low but urgent. "Close the circuit," he said. She stumbled toward the center of the room. "Tell me how," she shouted. "By giving it what it's missing." The ground shook, a deep metallic groan reverberating through the walls. Behind her, Shaw's voice echoed down the stairs. "Stop this. You'll destroy everything." Clara turned. He was halfway down, his outline glowing faintly now, the same golden light threading through his skin. His shadow no longer followed him. It moved in front of him, pulling him downward like an anchor. He reached out a hand. "Clara, listen to me. If you close it, the light will take you too." Her hands tightened around the bar. "Then maybe that's the point." She lifted it above her head, the glow flooding the chamber. The gold in the crates responded, pulsing in unison. Rain's projection flickered violently, his voice dissolving into static. Shaw screamed, lunging forward. "Don't!" The light burst outward in a wave so bright it erased color, sound, and shape. For a long moment there was nothing, then silence. When Clara opened her eyes, the chamber was dark. The glow had vanished, the crates were gone, the gold bar in her hands had cooled, its shine reduced to dull metal. Shaw lay on the floor, motionless. His face looked young, too young, his body rigid and pale. The faint outline of the sunburst symbol was burned into his chest, glowing dimly once before fading. Clara dropped the gold bar, her breath ragged. The silence pressed against her until she could no longer tell if the hum was gone or if it had simply moved inside her. Slowly, she climbed the stairs back to the surface. The Liberty was quiet again, its air stale and cold. The projector hung lifeless, the torn screen sagging. Everything looked ordinary, dead even. She stood in the middle of the auditorium, chest rising and falling with slow, shaky breaths. Outside, dawn was breaking through the fog, washing the cracked marquee in silver light. And yet, as she turned toward the exit, a faint shimmer caught her eye, a reflection gliding across the glass door. Her own reflection, but it smiled when she didn't. For a long time she stared at it, waiting for it to fade. It didn't, and then, faintly, from somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, she heard it again, that low, pulsing hum. It wasn't gone. It had simply changed hosts. Clara closed her eyes, a single tear tracing down her cheek. As the sun rose over the town, the Liberty stood silent, once more, its heart calm, its secret buried again. For now, morning broke without sound. The world outside felt drained of color, as if even daylight feared to enter the Liberty. The fog still hung low, soft and unmoving, curling around the theater's broken marquee. Inside, the silence wasn't peace, it was aftermath. Clara Reese stood at the foot of the stage, her reflection faintly visible in the blackened screen above her. Dust shimmered in thin streaks of light through the cracked windows. Her hands, blistered and bruised, trembled as she reached up and touched the surface of the screen, the same screen that had once burned with living gold. It was cold now. The night before was a blur, a storm of sound, light, and terror, collapsing into an instant of absolute stillness. She could barely remember the moment the vault sealed again. Only the look on Shaw's face, frozen in disbelief, his eyes glowing like twin suns before the light devoured him. He was gone. The vault was closed. And yet, she knew it wasn't over. Something inside her still pulsed, faint but constant. The hum that had filled the theater now lived beneath her skin. She could feel it when she touched metal, when she blinked into light, when she tried to rest. It was as if the dawnlight had marked her permanently. She whispered to the empty theater, "It's over." Right? The air didn't answer. She glanced at the gold bar lying near the first row, the one that had survived the collapse of the vault. It was dull now, stripped of its impossible glow, but she couldn't bring herself to touch it again. It felt like holding someone's heartbeat in her hands. Instead, she walked toward the old projector. Its body was cracked, its lens shattered from the blast, yet something deep inside it still hummed faintly, a whisper of current, a ghost of power. Clara hesitated, then placed her palm over the cooling brass surface. The hum beneath her skin aligned with the one in the machine, like two notes finding harmony. A spark jumped. The projector groaned to life with a single, reluctant churn of its motor. Dust spiraled into the beam that cut through the booth's cracked window. But there was no reel inside, no film, no image, no reason for the light, and yet the beam didn't stop. It hit the screen, and where it struck, faint words began to appear, burned slowly into the fabric like handwriting made of fire. Clara stepped closer, her heart pounding. Operation Dawnlight Sequence 1. Preservation Protocol. The letters burned brighter, then dissolved, replaced by flickering images. Not ghosts this time. Film, actual film, footage of men in suits and lab coats, government insignias, military warehouses, trucks being loaded under floodlights, every frame sharp, deliberate, official. She stood frozen, eyes wide. It wasn't just history, it was evidence. "Rains," she whispered, "you filmed everything." The camera panned to a large storage room filled with crates identical to the ones she'd found beneath the theater. A voiceover crackled faintly through the static, male and measured Rains himself. Dawnlight represents the future of preservation, of memory, of power, of identity itself. The human mind, when captured through the lens, can be refined, crystallized, made eternal. Clara felt her throat close. No. The footage continued, a laboratory, bodies connected to wires and glowing chambers. A man convulsing as golden light consumed his outline. Scientists shouting, shielding their eyes. "We are close," Rain's voice continued. "The light stabilizes consciousness. The host remains aware even after physical death. We have transcended mortality." Clara stumbled backward, shaking her head. You turn people into light. The film shifted again, a test chamber. Shaw stood beside Rains now, both wearing dark goggles. They watched as another subject, a woman, sat calmly under a hanging bulb. The light grew brighter, brighter, until her form flickered out completely. When the glare faded, only her shadow remained burned into the wall behind her. Rains spoke again, his tone lower, shaken. The containment is unstable. The subjects retain emotion, memory, will. We cannot distinguish between illumination and possession. Then Shaw's voice joined his younger, sharper, but already carrying that same cold detachment. You're not witnessing possession, Jonathan. You're witnessing evolution. The sound cut out. The image froze on Shaw's face, eyes half-lidded, lips curled in that same unsettling smile Clara had seen the night before. Then the footage jumped. A new date flashed. July 17, 1953, the golden premiere, the final night. The image stabilized to show the Liberty Theater brand new, glittering with gold. Guests entering in evening wear, unaware they were stepping into history's darkest experiment. The camera panned toward the projector booth, where Rains stood adjusting dials, sweat gleaming on his forehead. Initiate dawnlight sequence, Shaw's voice commanded. Rains hesitated in the frame. It's not ready. Shaw leaned closer to him, his expression calm, confident. Neither were we. The film jumped again, the screen went white, then chaos, the audience screaming, light bursting from the projector like fire. The ceiling collapsing. Frames melting together, fire, smoke, and Rain's hand reaching toward the lens before the reel snapped. And then the final image. The Liberty in ruins. Rain's voice whispering through static. If this reaches the wrong hands, let the light sleep. The screen went black. The projector hummed once, then stopped completely. Clara stood trembling in the silence that followed. Her mind raced, the truth too vast to contain. Operation Dawnlight hadn't been about stolen gold. It was about stolen souls, about the attempt to preserve human consciousness and the greed that turned it into imprisonment. Rains hadn't hidden treasure. He had buried witnesses, and she had just reopened their tomb. Her reflection in the darkened screen looked back at her older now, eyes hollow but glinting with faint gold beneath the pupils. She touched her face. "What did you do to me?" The air shifted behind her, a faint movement, like a breeze through closed doors. She turned sharply, her pulse spiking. There, in the faint light of the booth, stood a shadow. Not Rains, not Shaw, someone else, a woman's silhouette. The same shape she had seen burned into the wall of the film, the test subject who had vanished into light. The voice came soft, distorted, beautiful. "You opened it. Now help us finish it." The room dimmed, the glow from the projector fading into a deep, warm gold. The woman stepped forward, her form flickering between light and body. Her face was calm, but her eyes were endless. "We are the reflection," she whispered, "and you are the source." Clara's knees weakened, the words burrowing into her chest like truth she'd always known. The light began to move again, crawling up the walls, spilling across the screen. Images of faces, hundreds, filled the room, all looking at her, all whispering her name. She staggered backward, pressing herself against the cold metal of the booth. No, she breathed no more. But the light had already found her. And this time it wasn't asking permission. The projector flared, flooding the Liberty with golden fire. And the story of Operation Dawnlight, the secret Rains tried to bury and Shaw tried to claim, awakened fully, ready to be seen again. The light was everywhere. It poured through the cracks in the walls, flooded from the seams of the projector, and shimmered through the dust that hung in the air like particles of memory. Clara shielded her face with one arm, but there was no hiding from it. It was inside the room, alive and aware. The woman's voice still echoed in her head, soft but commanding. We are the reflection, and you are the source. Clara stumbled backward, her heel catching on a step, sending her sprawling against the booth wall. The air burned cold. The golden glow pulsed against her eyelids even when she closed them. Each pulse matched her heartbeat. She could feel it sinking, binding. When she opened her eyes, the light wasn't light anymore, it was memory. The faces that filled the air were no longer faint silhouettes. They had depth now, clarity, expression. Dozens of men and women, flickering in and out of existence like film frames, stitched too quickly together. Some wore lab coats, some military uniforms, others formal suits from another era. All of them looked alive, and every pair of eyes was fixed on her. You released us. A man's voice whispered, you woke us. Another murmured, finish what Rains began. A chorus of voices layered, haunting, beautiful, wrong. Clara pressed her hands over her ears, shaking her head. No, I didn't mean to, I just wanted to stop it. The woman's voice again, closer now, warm and calm like a mother soothing a frightened child. You can't stop light. You can only choose what it reveals. The words sank into her bones. The woman stepped forward, her form stabilizing into a figure almost solid, now the same test subject from the film, the one who had vanished during the Dawnlight experiment. Her features flickered with light bleeding through her skin, veins of gold under translucent flesh. You shouldn't exist. Clara whispered, you were burned away. The woman smiled faintly, burned or refined. The room trembled. The air thickened, pressing inward, suffocating. The projector began to whirl faster, the film it shouldn't have running through its reels with mechanical precision. The screen below came alive again, but it didn't show old footage anymore. It showed Clara. She froze. On the screen, her image stood exactly as she was now, hands trembling, eyes wide. But her reflection on the screen moved first, its motions deliberate, detached. The reflection smiled. Clara didn't know. She breathed, no, this isn't real. The reflection stepped closer on the screen, the camera view tilting slightly as if it were walking toward her. You see it now, the other Clara said, her voice echoing from the speakers above. The truth Rains found, the truth Shaw tried to steal. Stop it, Clara screamed, slamming the side of the projector. The machine sparked, but the reel kept spinning, relentless. You are the bridge. Her reflection continued. The vessel, the final host. The light swelled again, forcing Clara to her knees. The air vibrated like 1,000 overlapping voices. Beneath the sound, faintly, she heard Rain's voice again, a recording buried inside the chaos. If the light finds a pure source, it will stabilize. One soul to contain the many. Clara's heart pounded. You mean me? Rain's voice continued, calm and desperate at once. If it doesn't, it will consume everything. The chamber beneath the theater answered his warning with a deep, resonant growl. The ground shook. The entire building vibrated. A fissure split across the back wall, leaking light like molten gold. Clara staggered to her feet. The woman, the golden figure, turned her gaze toward it, expression serene. The vault is waking. The crack widened, spilling golden streams across the floor. The air filled with a low, frequency hum that made the windows shiver. Every image on the screen warped and twisted, their faces distorting into screams. Clara's reflection on the screen began to convulse. Its body flickered in and out, a flicker of shadow and light, twisting violently into something monstrous. Stop, Clara shouted. Stop, please. The projector roared, its gears grinding like an engine at the brink of collapse. Sparks erupted from its base. The woman turned back to her, eyes filled with sorrow. It's not punishment, it's release. I don't want to be a part of this, Clara cried. The figure stepped forward, reaching out a glowing hand. You already are. When the fingers brushed Clara's cheek, a flood of visions slammed into her mind. She saw Rains in his lab, watching his first test subject dissolve into pure light. She saw him sobbing afterward, whispering, "I'm sorry." She saw Shaw standing over him years later, convincing him to continue, promising glory. Then the premiere, the night everything burned, the audience screaming as the experiment expanded beyond control. Rains slamming switches, trying to shut the system down, Shaw smiling as the golden fire spread. Then the vault, the burial, Rains sealing the chamber, whispering prayers to the light he had created. "Sleep," he said, "until the world is ready to see itself." And finally, Clara buying the abandoned theater, standing in that same booth 70 years later, unknowingly opening the same door Rains had sealed with his dying breath. The vision snapped. Clara fell to her knees, gasping, sobbing, clutching her head. "No more," she whispered. "Please, no more." The woman knelt beside her, glowing faintly. "It's not more," she said softly. "It's all, and it's yours now." The light began to gather, swirling, converging, every face, every shimmer, every fragment of memory drawn toward Clara like water into a drain. She screamed, but there was nowhere to run. The light poured into her through her eyes, her mouth, her skin filling her veins with fire. Her body arched, her scream lost in the sound of 1,000 voices merging into one. Then silence. The projector stopped. The beam faded. The golden dust hung suspended midair, motionless. Clara lay on the floor of the booth, chest heaving, her skin glowing faintly beneath the thin fabric of her shirt. The woman's voice returned, not aloud, but inside her mind. "You did what he couldn't. You completed it." Clara lifted her head weakly, eyes burning gold in the dark. What am I now? The keeper of light." Below, the Liberty trembled once more, but this time the glow didn't threaten to consume. It pulsed steadily, calmly, like the rhythm of a living heart. Clara stood slowly, staring at her reflection in the glass window of the booth. The woman's silhouette appeared behind her, smiling softly. "Rains built the prison," the voice said. "You turned it into sanctuary." Tears slipped down Clara's cheeks. She whispered, "Then let them rest." The woman nodded. "They already have." The glow faded gradually from her veins, the gold dimming into a warm, steady shimmer beneath her skin, not dangerous now, but protective. The projector clicked one last time, projecting a single phrase onto the screen below in faint, golden letters, "Dawnlight complete," and then the beam died. The Liberty fell still. For the first time in 70 years, the building was quiet, not dead, not haunted, just still. Clara stood alone in the booth, breathing softly, the afterglow of the light fading into dawn. She whispered to the silence, "Rest now, Jonathan." Somewhere beneath the floor, a low echo answered, not words, just warmth. And as she walked toward the door, the first rays of morning broke through the cracked marquee, spilling real sunlight through the lobby. For the first time, the Liberty's light belonged to the living again. It had been 3 days since the light went quiet. The Liberty Theatre stood silent on the corner of Broad and Ash, its windows boarded, its doors locked with fresh bolts Clara had installed herself. The neon sign no longer flickered, the air no longer hummed. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary ruin again, forgotten, harmless. But inside, beneath layers of dust and plaster, the gold still slept. Clara sat on the front steps, staring at the sunrise bleeding through the morning haze. Her face looked drawn, older. The light beneath her skin had dimmed, but it hadn't gone. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, she could still feel it stir a low pulse deep in her chest, reminding her that it never truly left. The world outside had resumed its rhythm. The town's traffic murmured in the distance. Someone laughed from a cafe across the street. Life had moved on, as though the past 70 years hadn't just unfolded again in her hands. She wanted to believe it was over. She told herself that every morning that the light had faded, that Rains and Shaw and the echoes of their greed were gone. But at night, when she closed her eyes, she saw them still. The faces in the gold. The woman who'd said, "You're the source." Sometimes, when she whispered a question into the dark, she swore the air shimmered faintly, as if the Liberty was still listening. Today, she wasn't alone. A figure stood on the sidewalk across the street watching her, not menacingly, just observing. He wore a tan jacket, carried a messenger bag, and had the weary posture of someone who'd spent too long following questions. He raised a hand in a cautious wave. "Clara Reese." She turned slowly, wary. "Who's asking?" He crossed the street, stopping a few feet away. "Name's Daniel Harper. I'm with the Chronicle, Investigative Division." He hesitated before adding, "You've been hard to reach." Clara sighed, rubbing her temples. "I've been busy, trying not to lose my mind." Daniel nodded. "I heard about the theater. Some locals said you bought it, tried restoring it. Then they said there was a fire again." She looked past him toward the boarded windows. There was no fire. He studied her quietly, pulling a notepad from his bag. Then what happened? She didn't answer. The truth was too heavy, too wild, too dangerous to put into words. He took a slow step closer. "I know that name Rains. We've been digging into old files for years. Wartime gold, missing shipments, a classified operation called Dawnlight. Every trail ended here. You've seen something, haven't you?" Clara's breath caught. "That word, where did you hear it?" He flipped open his notes, revealing black and white photographs, the same symbols, the same sunburst emblem. "You're not the only one looking for answers, but you're the only one still standing who's been inside." The air between them tightened. "I don't know what you think you'll find," she said softly, "but you won't like it." He tilted his head. "Try me." Clara looked down at her hands. In the pale light of dawn, she could see it again, the faint shimmer beneath her skin, like gold dust caught in motion. "Some truths don't want to be told. That's not for the truth to decide," Daniel said quietly. "That's for us." She almost laughed, a dry, exhausted sound. That's what Rains thought too. It didn't end well for him. Daniel studied her expression, something shifting in his eyes, empathy, maybe, or fear. "What did you see, Clara?" Her voice lowered. "Everything." The silence that followed felt sacred, heavy. After a moment, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, metallic fragment, the edge of a gold bar, cracked clean through the middle. She handed it to him. He took it carefully. "This is real," she finished. "But not what you think. It's not treasure. It's not currency. It's memory, captured, refined, imprisoned." Daniel frowned, turning it in his hand. "You mean?" "I mean people," she said. "Dozens, maybe hundreds. Their minds, their voices, they're all inside it. The gold holds them like film holds light." He stared at her, searching for disbelief but finding none. "You have to show me." "I can't." "Then tell me." She hesitated, her voice trembling when it finally came. "The truth isn't buried in history. It's buried in us. You start digging, and you'll wake it again." Daniel studied her face for a long time. "I think it's already awake." A chill passed through her at his words. The wind picked up, rustling the old posters still clinging to the Liberty's outer wall. He tucked the gold fragment into his pocket. "If you change your mind, my office is in Cedar Grove. We're publishing something next week. Rains, Shore, Operation Dawnlight, all of it. Someone needs to finish what he started." "Don't," Clara whispered. Daniel met her gaze. "You can't silence light, Clara. You said so yourself." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing on the steps. She didn't call after him, didn't try to stop him. What could she say? He was right. She had said those words, though not to him, to the light, to Rains, to herself. Now, the reflection of those words hung in her chest like a curse. When Daniel's figure disappeared down the street, the wind fell still again. Clara looked up at the boarded windows, feeling the hum beneath her skin return, faint, rhythmic, alive. Inside the theater, something shifted. a creak of wood, the sound of film running, faint but unmistakable. She turned toward the door. No, she whispered, not again. But the glow was already forming behind the cracks in the boards, golden and slow, like the breath of something waking from a long, careful sleep. Her reflection in the glass of the ticket booth flickered once and smiled back. Clara stepped away from the door, heart pounding, the realization cutting deep and cold. She hadn't stopped Operation Dawnlight. She had inherited it, and somewhere down the street, a journalist carried a fragment of gold in his pocket, unaware that it wasn't just history he was holding, it was hunger. As the morning sun rose over the quiet town, Clara whispered to the wind, God help him, he doesn't know what light costs. And for the first time, the Liberty's boarded doors pulsed faintly, a heartbeat in the dark. By evening, the town sank into a hush that felt heavier than usual, the kind of quiet that carries too many secrets. The streets were empty. The fog had returned, creeping between lampposts like memory given form. From her window, Clara watched the light of passing cars fade and vanish. Every sound, a dog barking, a distant horn, felt borrowed from another world. She hadn't moved all day. The conversation with Daniel Harper replayed in her head like a reel she couldn't stop. His face, that mixture of curiosity and disbelief, the way he said, "You can't silence light." He didn't understand. He couldn't. Rains had tried to silence it. Shaw had tried to own it. And now Daniel, driven by the same hunger for truth, wanted to expose it. None of them realized that light didn't reveal without taking something in return. When night came, the wind rose. The Liberty loomed across the street, its silhouette darker than the sky behind it. Every few seconds, the boards on the windows rattled faintly, as if the building were breathing again. Clara pressed her palm against the cold windowpane. The faint hum beneath her skin pulsed once steady, familiar. It's still inside you, a voice whispered in her head, soft and calm, though she didn't know whose it was anymore. Hers, Rain's, the woman of light. The reflection in the glass shimmered faintly. For a moment she saw not her own face but the reflection of the Liberty's marquee, glowing faintly through the fog. The letters, long dead, flickered in uneven intervals until one word formed through the static shimmer of neon. Dawn. Her breath fogged the glass. No, it's over. The air behind her shifted, a soft vibration, almost like a murmur. She turned sharply, but there was no one. Only the faint sound of her heartbeat echoing through the walls. Then her phone buzzed on the counter, an unknown number. Her stomach twisted. She hesitated before answering. Hello. Static answered first, then a familiar voice, muffled but clear enough to freeze her blood. Miss Reese, it's Daniel Harper. She exhaled shakily. Daniel, it's late. I know. I had to call. Something's happening. Where are you? At my office. Clara, I think you were right. She gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean? The fragment. The gold you gave me, it's reacting to something. I left it on my desk under the lamp, and when I turned the lights off, it started glowing. Her heart lurched. Daniel, listen to me. You need to get rid of it. I can't, he said quickly. It's showing things, faces, like it's projecting without film. There's a woman, her eyes. The line crackled violently. She pressed the phone to her ear, shouting, Daniel, get out of there. It's showing you, Clara. Her breath caught. What? It's showing you in the theater. The line went dead. Clara's hand shook as she lowered the phone. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She stared through the fog at the Liberty, and for a fleeting second she saw it, a faint golden flicker from behind the boards, like a candle flame in the dark. The hum inside her chest deepened, vibrating through her bones. She grabbed her coat and keys, running out the door before she could think twice. The cold hit her like a wall, slicing through her lungs as she crossed the street. When she reached the Liberty, she didn't use the key. The front doors opened at her touch, silent, slow, as if welcoming her back. The air inside was thick with dust and static. Her flashlight flickered, the beam weak and uncertain. She called out, voice trembling, "Daniel?" Her echo was the only reply. She climbed the stairs to the projection booth. The smell of ozone and decay filled the air, the same scent that had lingered after the explosion of light days earlier. The booth was exactly as she'd left it, except for one thing. The projector was on. It shouldn't have been. The power was cut. The lens glowed faintly, projecting an image onto the blackened screen below. Clara stepped forward, her heart hammering. No. The image was live. Not film, not memory. It was a newsroom, Daniel Harper's office. Papers scattered across his desk. The gold fragment lying in the center, glowing softly, and Daniel himself sitting motionless in his chair. "Daniel!" she shouted, though she knew he couldn't hear her. The image flickered, distorting. Daniel's reflection in the glass of his office window began to move, but he didn't. It turned toward the camera, smiling faintly, eyes glowing faint gold. Clara backed away, whispering, "No, no, no." The light in the Liberty surged. Golden veins spread across the walls, pulsing in rhythm with the glow on the screen. The air vibrated, thick with heat. Then Daniel's voice echoed through the speakers, distorted, hollow. "You were right. It's alive." The screen flared white, the lights burst, darkness. When the glow faded, the image was gone. The projector stood silent, smoke curling faintly from its vents. Clara's legs gave out. She fell to her knees, gasping, hands trembling. It had spread. The light was no longer bound to the Liberty. It had found a way out. She looked toward the steel door at the back of the booth, the sealed entrance to the vault below. It pulsed faintly now, golden veins crawling outward, searching. Her whisper came broken and hoarse. "God, what have I done?" The building seemed to breathe in response. A faint whisper slipped through the dark, carried by the air, not quite a voice, not quite a sound. "You finished what we started." Clara stood slowly, her reflection in the glass window flickering once more. This time, her reflection spoke back, its lips moving a fraction after hers, smiling faintly. "Now let there be light." The hum swelled. Outside, the power grid in the town flickered, streetlights stuttering in perfect unison. One by one, windows in nearby buildings caught a faint gold reflection, spreading like dawn rising where it shouldn't. The Liberty trembled, exhaling a breath of dust and history. And in that moment, Clara Reese understood that Operation Dawnlight had never been an experiment in immortality. It had been invasion. Human greed had built the door. She had opened it, and now, light pure, conscious and hungry, was free again. She ran from the booth, down the stairs, across the lobby, the glow chasing her like liquid fire. As she burst into the street, the fog was gone, replaced by a strange golden mist rolling low along the ground. Every light in town burned the same color. She looked down at her hands. They were glowing again, not faintly, fully. The hum rose into a crescendo, vibrating through every window, every wall, every heartbeat in the city. Clara fell to her knees in the middle of the street, whispering into the golden dawn that wasn't dawn at all. "I tried to save you." And from everywhere at once, the buildings, the clouds, the very air, came the whispered reply, layered in 1,000 voices that weren't human anymore. "You did. You freed us." The light expanded, washing everything in gold, and as it reached the horizon, Clara understood. Dawn had come again, but this time it would never end. The world had turned gold. The morning sky bled with light that wasn't sunlight, an eerie, artificial glow that pulsed across the horizon, like the heartbeat of something newly born. The entire town shimmered under its influence. Windows reflected it. Street lamps hummed with it. Even puddles on the cracked pavement rippled in perfect synchronization. Clara Reese ran through streets that no longer felt like streets. Every surface was too bright, too smooth, too alive. The air itself hummed not just sound but sensation, a vibration that pressed into her skin, whispering through her bones. She wasn't alone. Figures moved in the golden haze, people she knew, faces from town, neighbors who'd once waved from porches or shared coffee at the diner. They walked without expression, their eyes glowing faintly. When they turned toward her, she saw it, the same shimmer beneath their skin that pulsed inside her own. The light had spread. It was inside them now too. Somewhere deep in the distance, the Liberty stood like a monument to everything that had gone wrong, its windows blazing with radiance, its silhouette flickering as though caught between worlds. The marquee lights blinked erratically, forming and reforming words that made no sense. Dawn/return/remember. Clara's breath caught as she stumbled toward it, clutching her coat tighter against the chill that wasn't cold but absence. Her mind screamed for reason, for explanation, but only one thought held shape. It's not over until I close it myself. As she neared the theater, the ground trembled. The glow from within pulsed outward, washing over the street in waves. Every object it touched shimmered: trees, cars, even the cracked pavement beneath her feet, all bending toward the Liberty as though gravity itself had changed direction. Clara reached the entrance, its once bolted doors hanging open. A warm wind exhaled from inside, the breath of a living thing. The smell was electric, ozone and iron, dust and fire. She stepped inside. The lobby was unrecognizable. The old ticket booth had melted into the wall, its glass twisted and reformed into translucent veins of gold. The floor tiles glowed faintly underfoot, patterns swirling like molten film. Every whisper she'd ever heard in this building was alive now, not echoing, but present. Voices overlapped. Rains, Shaw, the woman of light, countless others. She opened it. She freed us. She must finish it. Then tell me how. Clara shouted, her voice breaking, desperate. The air shimmered in answer, forming outlines of figures, phantoms of golden smoke, surrounding her. Among them, one stepped forward, solidifying with every flicker of the projector beam slicing through the air above. Jonathan Rains. He looked young again, unburned by guilt, his suit immaculate, his eyes carrying the unbearable calm of someone who already knows how the story ends. You came back, he said softly, his voice gentle but resonant, like two voices speaking at once, one human and one not. Clara's throat tightened. You built this, you did this to them. Rains nodded, sadness in his faint smile, and to myself. Then end it, she cried. Tell me how to stop it. He took a step closer, light spilling off his body like smoke. I tried once. But every end I made was another beginning. You saw that? The light doesn't die, it transforms. It's you now. She shook her head violently. No, it's using me. It's remembering you. Rains corrected gently. You gave it empathy. You gave it voice. Clara's hands trembled. It's consuming people. Look at them. Rains turned his gaze toward the walls, where silhouettes of the townspeople flickered, dozens of golden figures walking silently through overlapping reels of memory. Once, he said, they were forgotten. Now they exist forever. You call it horror. I call it preservation. Clara's anger flared. Preservation. You turned souls into film stock. He flinched at her words, the faintest trace of shame crossing his face. I thought immortality could be science. That memory could be purity, but purity, he whispered, always burns. The air shook violently, cutting their conversation short. The projector roared from above, alive, wild, uncontrolled. Its beam split the space like a blade of sunfire, cutting through the air toward the torn screen below. On it appeared a figure, Leland Shaw. His image towered over them. Half human, half light, his voice filling the entire theater. You think you're saving them, Jonathan. You never learned. Light doesn't obey, it conquers. Clara turned toward the projection booth, horror flooding her veins. The real projector was empty. The film spinning inside it wasn't physical, it was the light itself, looping its own image. Shaw stepped from the screen as though it were water, his glowing form solidifying with every step down the aisle. "You can't destroy the source," he said, smiling that same cruel, knowing smile. "You can only feed it." Rains moved between them, voice steady. "You corrupted it. Dawnlight was meant to reveal truth, not enslave it." Shaw laughed, a hollow echo that shook the chandeliers above. "Truth is enslavement. Humanity worships what it sees, and now they'll see me." He lifted his hand, the light around them bent toward him, gold turning to white, hot brilliance. The air grew unbearable. Rain staggered, his form fracturing under the surge. Clara screamed, shielding her eyes. "Stop!" Shaw's gaze locked on her. "You're the last piece, Clara, the living conduit. You finish this with me, or you burn with it." Rains reached for her, his voice desperate now. "Don't listen. He's feeding from you, from your belief." "I don't know what to believe," she shouted. The room erupted, beams of gold splitting the ceiling, streaking through the night sky like searchlights from another world. The air roared, alive with thousands of whispering voices, merging into a single deafening cry. Light never dies. Clara dropped to her knees, clutching her head. Every voice inside her Rains, the woman, the echoes of the dead screamed at once. Then she remembered something Rains had written in the ledger, the words she hadn't understood until now. "If the reflection reaches the screen, close the circuit." The circuit wasn't the vault, it wasn't the theater, it was her. She lifted her gaze toward the projector, the lens glowing like an open eye. Slowly, painfully, she rose. Rain stumbled forward. "Clara, don't." She met his gaze, tears streaming down her face. "It's the only way to end it." Her steps echoed through the blazing room. Shaw's grin faltered. "You can't contain it, Clara. It'll consume you. Maybe it already has." She climbed the stairs to the projection booth, the light growing brighter with each step. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest, syncing perfectly with the pulse of the machine. When she reached the booth, she placed her hands on the projector's sides. The metal was molten, hot, searing her skin. But she didn't let go. The entire building shook. The beam of light bent, flickering wildly. Rains shouted below, his voice drowned by the roar. Shaw reached for her, his outline warping in the light. "Let go," he bellowed. "It's not mercy, it's oblivion." But Clara didn't. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, "Let it see me." The light responded. The beam shattered into 1,000 fractal strands, each one carrying faces, memories, fragments of lives. They spiraled around her, pouring through her like water through glass. She screamed not in pain, but in release. For the first time the light saw her, and through her it saw everything it had ever consumed, all the stolen lives, all the forgotten souls, all the memories burned into eternity. The projector flared one final time, the walls cracking, the ceiling splitting open to the storm outside. Golden light poured upward through the breach, reaching clouds, painting the sky with radiance, and then silence. The beam vanished, the Liberty went dark. When the smoke cleared, Clara stood alone in the booth, trembling, her hands charred and bleeding, her eyes reflecting faint, dying embers of gold. Down below, the screen was blank for the first time in 70 years. No voices, no hum, no ghosts, just silence. Clara collapsed to her knees, the last flicker of light leaving her eyes as dawn, real dawn, began to break through the shattered ceiling. The story wasn't over yet, but the darkness had finally begun to remember itself again. Smoke and silence hung in the air, the kind that comes after a storm has spent itself. Dust drifted like snow through the fractured ceiling of the Liberty, where golden light had once burned through every wall. Now there was only dawn, pale, grey, and human again. Clara lay on the booth floor, the taste of iron in her mouth, the faint throb of pain behind her eyes. For a long moment she couldn't move. The hum was gone. The whispers were gone. For the first time in what felt like centuries, There was no sound but the creak of settling beams and the gentle tap of rain against broken glass. Her body was wrecked, hands blistered, face streaked with soot, but her mind was clear, clearer than it had ever been. She was still alive. The light hadn't taken her. It had shown her everything and then let her go. Slowly, she pushed herself upright, her movements stiff and trembling. The projector was blackened, its lens cracked, smoke curling faintly from its ruined shell. The air smelled of ozone and metal. Below, the main floor of the theater looked like the aftermath of an explosion frozen in time. The screen had been burned clean through a ragged hole opening to the morning sky. The golden stains on the walls had cooled into dull amber, like candle wax that had hardened mid-drip, and in that silence something else stirred, faint but steady, the sound of footsteps. Clara gripped the railing, leaning over the edge of the booth. Down below, in the center aisle, stood a figure, Jonathan Rains. He was different now, less light, more man. His edges flickered faintly, as though he existed halfway between shadow and memory. His voice carried upward, low and soft. "You did what I couldn't." Clara's throat tightened. "Did I stop it?" He looked around the ruined theater, eyes filled with both sorrow and relief. "You balanced it. The light remembers you now not as its keeper, but as its conscience." She shook her head weakly. "It killed them, Jonathan, all of them." Rain's form wavered, the faintest smile ghosting across his face. "No, Clara, you gave them back their names. The light isn't hunger anymore. It's history." Her knees nearly gave out. "Then what happens to me?" He met her gaze. "You live." The words hit harder than she expected. After everything, after the vault, the fire, the voices living, felt like the hardest thing left to do. Rains took a step forward, his form dimming with every movement. "But remember, this truth always asks for a witness. Don't let them bury it again." Clara blinked back, tears. "What about you?" His smile deepened, distant, peaceful. "I was never meant to last. I was the film, you're the frame." As the first rays of real sunlight broke through the ceiling, his form began to dissolve, the glow unraveling like dust caught in the wind. His final words echoed softly through the hollowed theater. "Light never dies, but it remembers who gave it mercy." And then he was gone. Only silence remained. Clara sank to her knees, her hands covering her face. Tears came slow, heavy, unstoppable, for Rains, for Shaw, for every name that had burned too long in the dark. She didn't know how long she stayed there. The morning light crept slowly across the ruined seats, washing over everything in gentle gold, not the furious gold of dawnlight, but something quieter, real. Hours later, the sound of sirens drew near. By the time rescue crews arrived, Clara was sitting on the front steps of the Liberty, wrapped in a soot-stained blanket, staring at the horizon. She barely heard the questions. Words like explosion, structural collapse, electrical fault floated around her, meaningless. She only answered when someone asked her name. "Clara Reese." She said softly, I'm the owner." One of the firefighters glanced back at the building. "You're lucky to be alive, ma'am." She smiled faintly, eyes unfocused. "Not luck, just light." They didn't understand, but that was fine. Some truths were meant to live quietly. The following week the Liberty was cordoned off. Engineers declared it unsafe. Plans were drawn for demolition. But Clara knew it wouldn't die, not really. The foundation would hold the story, even if the walls came down. She stayed in town for a while, helping where she could, avoiding reporters. When she passed by the site, she sometimes saw children pressing their faces to the caution tape, peering into the wreckage, whispering about ghosts and gold. One evening, as the sun set over the half-demolished facade, Clara stood across the street, a small notebook in her hand. Inside were names, every name she could remember from the ledgers and reels. She whispered each one aloud, letting the sound of them rise and vanish into the wind. For every name, the air shimmered faintly just for a heartbeat, as though the light itself were listening. When she finished, she tucked the notebook into the rubble, between two broken bricks of the old marquee. Then she turned to leave, but something made her stop. From within the ruin, the faintest flicker caught her eye, a single bulb glowing weakly. Behind what remained of the ticket booth, she stepped closer, breath-catching. It wasn't a bulb. It was the projector lens, cracked, blackened, and impossibly still working. For a moment, a beam of faint golden light streamed out, cutting through the dust. On the opposite wall, it cast a single image, her, not the Clara who had survived the fire, or the battle, or the light, but the Clara who had walked into the Liberty for the first time, scared and hopeful and searching for something she didn't yet understand. The image smiled softly. Clara smiled back. "You can rest now." The light blinked once, then faded forever. Days later, the Chronicle ran a front-page story written by Daniel Harper, or rather, finished by someone else. He was gone, missing since the night the lights in Cedar Grove had flickered gold. His unfinished article had been found on his computer. The title already typed, "The Light That Remembered?" It told of stolen gold, forgotten experiments, and a woman who turned ghosts into truth. It ended with a single line, left without punctuation, as though he'd meant to return to it. Sometimes, what we call salvation is just the courage to tell the story. Clara cut it out and pinned it to her wall. That night, she sat by her window as rain fell, her reflection faintly illuminated by passing headlights. For the first time, her skin showed no trace of gold. She whispered to the empty room, "It's done." The wind moved softly through the cracks of the old house, a sigh, not a voice, but enough to make her close her eyes. And somewhere far away, in the ruins of the Liberty Theatre, the faint hum of film turning one last time whispered through the dark. Then silence, and in that silence, peace. Not the absence of sound, but the promise that light, once freed from greed, can finally rest. 6 months later, the Liberty stood again, not as it was, but as it was meant to be. The sky above the small town shimmered pale blue that spring morning, the kind of clear light that made even cracked pavement gleam like glass. Birds perched on the restored marquee, where new letters, freshly painted and proud, spelled out the Liberty Community Cinema stories that deserve the light. For Clara Reese, standing across the street, it didn't feel real. She had walked by this corner 1,000 times before, when it was condemned, when it was cursed, when it had burned and nearly taken her with it. But now the building stood reborn. The walls were clean, the roof repaired, the windows gleaming. The old Art Deco trim still curved proudly around the entrance, but now the golden tones came from paint, not possession. The theater that had once been a vault for stolen souls was now a sanctuary for stories the kind people wanted to share, not hide. Clara drew a slow breath, the crisp air filling her chest, grounding her in the present. The faint smell of sawdust still lingered from the final phase of reconstruction. Somewhere inside, she could hear the muffled sound of hammering, laughter, and the shuffle of volunteers preparing for opening night. She never thought she'd see this day. 6 months ago, she hadn't wanted to. After the night of fire and light, after rains vanished, after Daniel Harper's article became his epitaph, Clara had tried to disappear too. She'd spent weeks on the road, sleeping in cheap motels, driving through empty highways without a destination. But the past had followed her. Every night, she dreamed of the Liberty, not the nightmare version, but the real one, the laughter that once echoed there, the films, the promise it once held before greed and secrecy devoured it. Eventually, the dreams became a call she couldn't ignore. She came back, and when she did, she found the town changed. People whispered about her still. A woman who'd survived the explosion, the one the police said had uncovered something strange beneath the old theater. But they also thanked her, quietly, gratefully, because when she returned, she didn't rebuild for herself. She rebuilt for them. She turned toward the front doors, sunlight reflecting on the brass handles. For a long moment she hesitated before stepping inside. The lobby was alive again, posters lining the walls, each one hand, painted by local artists. Some featured children's films, others documentaries about forgotten heroes, one even about the Liberty's own restoration. The scent of popcorn filled the air. A record player hummed softly in the corner, playing an old jazz tune that fluttered like memory. Clara's steps echoed gently on the polished floor. She ran her hand over the counter, the same one where she'd once seen her reflection smile back. Without her, now the glass was clear, just glass. Her reflection smiled again, this time her own. Behind her, a voice broke the quiet. "You really did it." She turned. It was Lee, her 17-year-old daughter, standing with her arms folded, trying to hide the smile tugging at her lips. The same daughter who had once begged her to sell the place, to walk away before it swallowed her whole. Clara laughed softly. "You didn't think I could, did you?" Lee shrugged, eyes glinting. "You bought a haunted theater for $500. I didn't think you'd survive it, let alone rebuild it." Clara smiled. "Guess miracles come cheap." Lee rolled her eyes but stepped closer, her tone softening. "It's beautiful, Mom." "Really?" For a moment, silence hung between them, the kind that carries years of pain, love, and forgiveness all at once. Clara reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for all the things I couldn't fix before this." Lee looked down, her voice breaking a little. "You did fix them. You fixed you." The words hit harder than Clara expected. Her chest tightened, and she swallowed back the ache in her throat. From the doorway to the main auditorium, a volunteer called out, "Mrs. Reese, we're ready for the test, reel." Clara nodded. "We'll be right there." Lee frowned. "You're really gonna play something on that projector?" Clara laughed softly. "Not the old one, that one's retired." She gestured to the side of the lobby, where a glass case stood with a small plaque. "The original projector room door sealed 1953 / opened 2025 / closed forever." Inside the case, the old steel door stood upright, polished but untouched, beyond that a relic of both horror and history. Lee stepped closer, peering at it. "You actually kept it. It's part of the story," Clara said quietly, "and stories are all we have left when the light fades." Lee turned back to her mother, eyes glistening. "You sound like one of those old movie narrators." Clara chuckled, slipping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Maybe that's who I was meant to be." Together, they stepped through the lobby and into the auditorium. The space glowed with soft amber light. New seats had been installed, the velvet curtains restored, the stage polished. The ceiling mural, once blackened and crumbling, now gleamed again with painted constellations, tiny pinpricks of silver that shimmered like stars. On the stage, a small group of townspeople were setting up folding chairs, testing sound levels, adjusting lights. The new projector, sleek, modern, and mercifully digital, sat ready in the booth above. Clara walked down the aisle, her footsteps soft against the carpet. Every creak, every smell, every sound brought memories flooding back, but not of fear, of purpose. She reached the front of the stage and looked out at the rows of empty seats. In her mind, she could almost see them filled again, faces illuminated by flickering light, laughter echoing where screams once did, a theater reborn, a story reclaimed. She turned to her daughter. "Want to start it?" Lee grinned. "You sure? Go on." Lee ran to the control booth and pressed a button. The projector hummed to life, smooth, steady, ordinary. The first frame hit the screen, casting soft light across the theater. It wasn't gold. It wasn't haunted. It was just light. And in that simple beam, Clara felt peace. The film began. short documentary made by the local school, titled The Liberty, Then and Now. It opened with a black and white photograph of the theater in 1953, crowds in suits and dresses, children waving programs, the marquee glowing bright. The narrator's voice, young and clear, said, "Once, this theater was a dream. Then, it became a secret, and then, a legend, but today, it's a home for every story that refused to stay buried." Clara's eyes filled with tears as the audience on screen faded into color, the restored Liberty, alive again, filled with laughter. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "Every light deserves a second showing." And for the first time since the day she bought the old building, the light that filled her wasn't burdened by fear or history. It was hope, plain and human and real. Outside, the sun climbed higher, reflecting off the newly polished windows of the Liberty, and for those who passed by, it wasn't just a building anymore. It was a promise that even the darkest places could hold light again. The applause came softly at first, a hesitant, uncertain sound that grew until it filled every corner of the newly reborn theater. The first screening had ended. The lights came up, slowly, golden and gentle, washing across faces marked by awe, nostalgia, and tears. Clara stood near the back, her hand resting on the doorframe, watching. She didn't move to the stage or bow or speak. She didn't need to. The moment wasn't hers to claim, it belonged to everyone who had believed. The Liberty could breathe again. Children laughed in the aisles. Elderly couples wiped their eyes. A few townsfolk lingered near the screen, as if reluctant to leave, whispering about the images they'd just seen, the fusion of the theater's dark history and the light of its rebirth. For the first time in 70 years, the Liberty had told the truth, and it had done so in its own language, light and story. Clara's gaze wandered to the far left wall, where the new mural had been painted, a rising sun breaking over the silhouette of the Liberty itself. Beneath it, a plaque gleamed softly under the amber lights, dedicated to all who remember and to those who chose to forgive. She touched the edge of the plaque with trembling fingers, her voice a whisper. "We did it." Beside her, Lee appeared, her expression glowing with pride. "They loved it," she said softly. "You can hear it, they actually loved it." Clara smiled. "They didn't love me, honey, they loved the light." Lee leaned against her shoulder. "Same thing." They stood like that for a while, watching as the crowd began to disperse, laughter spilling out through the newly polished glass doors. Outside, the evening was soft and cool. The golden light of sunset poured through the entrance, merging with the theater's glow until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Then, out of the fading applause, a familiar voice spoke behind them. "I never thought I'd see it alive again." Clara turned. It was Officer Graham, the same man who'd investigated the theater months ago, who'd stood on those steps when the building still smoked, asking questions she couldn't answer. He looked older now, calmer somehow, as if time had been kind enough to give him the clarity he'd once lacked. "Neither did I," Clara said. He glanced toward the stage. "The town needed this. You did something good here." She smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe the theater just decided it was tired of being haunted." Graham chuckled. "If walls could talk, huh?" Clara looked around at the lights, the laughter, the quiet hum of life returning. "These ones do," she said softly, "just not in words." He studied her for a moment longer before nodding, something like respect in his eyes. "Whatever happened here, you made peace with it. That's enough." After he left, Clara stood alone in the aisle for a while, watching the flickering reflections dance across the walls. For a brief second, she thought she saw something, a faint shimmer at the far end of the theater, near the old projection booth. A flicker of light gold, gentle and familiar. Her heart tightened, not with fear this time, but gratitude. "Hello, Jonathan," she whispered. The shimmer pulsed softly in reply, then faded like a sigh. Clara turned back to the crowd. The last of the audience was leaving, their laughter echoing down the street. Lee was outside now, helping close the doors. Across the glass, their reflections overlapped, mother and daughter, two silhouettes framed in the same light that had once destroyed so much. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. She exhaled slowly. "It's done," she said to the empty air. "You can rest now." Later that night, when the theater was empty, Clara lingered alone in the projection booth. The new projector sat silent, its sleek surface reflecting her tired face. On the console beside it lay a small, time-worn film reel, the last undeveloped one she'd found months ago, sealed inside a rusted canister beneath the stage. She'd almost thrown it away, but something told her to keep it. Now, under the soft hum of the building's new lights, she held it up to the glow. The film glimmered faintly between her fingers, fragile, translucent, alive with flecks of gold embedded in celluloid. Her pulse quickened. "Just one more story," she murmured. She loaded the reel into the machine and pressed play. The film flickered to life on the small side wall of the booth, not on the grand screen, but on a patch of bare plaster. The image was grainy at first, almost too faint. See, then it came into focus. It wasn't footage of Rains or Shaw or the experiments. It was footage of her, Clara Reese, standing in the Liberty doorway 6 months ago, the day she returned. She froze, staring, her mind trying to comprehend how this could exist. The camera followed her silently as she walked through the dust-filled lobby, tracing the cracks in the wall, pausing at the projector. The woman on the screen turned suddenly, looked straight into the camera, and smiled. Then she spoke. "Every story ends twice, once when it's told, and once when it's understood." The image flickered, the reel spinning faster, the edges of the frame brightening with faint gold. "You chose light, Clara. That's all we ever wanted." Her throat closed. She reached for the wall, her palm flat against the warm surface where the image played. "Who are you?" she whispered. "The reflection." The voice said softly, fading, "Always the reflection." The light dimmed, the film ended. Clara stood in the quiet for a long moment, her heartbeat slow, steady. She didn't rewind the reel. She let it rest there, like a memory allowed to finally stay still. She looked out through the booth window, down at the rows of empty seats and the screen glowing faintly in the dim lights. It looked peaceful, almost sacred, a cathedral of light and silence, at last free from its ghosts. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and she smiled. The Liberty was no longer a tomb or a secret. It was what it had always wanted to be, a storyteller. Outside, the night was calm. The marquee lights blinked rhythmically, their reflection stretching across the wet pavement. A few fireflies hovered in the cool air, flickering like small, patient souls. Clara locked the doors, took one last look at the glowing sign, and whispered, "Thank you." As she walked down the street, the lights above her dimmed one by one, not in loss, but in closure. When she reached the corner, she turned back. The Liberty stood quiet, its neon letters shining one final time before fading into the darkness, leaving only the faint glow of the words painted on its wall. "Every light deserves a second showing." And for the first time, the light didn't feel like power. It didn't feel like curse or salvation. It felt human. It felt home. And as the town drifted into the soft quiet of midnight, the Liberty exhaled its final breath of golden dust into the cool air, not as a warning, not as a ghost, but as a benediction. A whisper from one soul to another, saying simply, "Remember, but live." Fade to black. After the applause faded and the town learned to breathe again, Clara discovered that endings didn't arrive with trumpets. They arrived with mornings, quiet ones, where coffee steamed in a kitchen that finally felt like home, and the sun slipped across the counter like a promise kept. She woke to that kind of morning now. The season had turned, and with it the rhythm of the Liberty. Posters changed, volunteers rotated. The smell of popcorn became a calendar sense. Wheat, ordinary, dependable. The theater no longer throbbed with a hidden pulse. It hummed with the soft machinery of life. Brooms against lobby tile, the click of a ticket scanner, the shy hello of a kid buying a seat with change saved all month. Clara walked the block with a stack of flyers tucked under her arm. Community night, found stories. People waved from shop doors. Someone in a window held up a homemade sign that read, "Thank you, Clara." She answered the same way she always did, with a small nod that meant we did this together. Inside the Liberty, sunlight wandered through the glass like a curious guest. Lee was already at the front desk, trading jokes with a pair of retirees. Never missed matinees. When she saw her mother, she lifted an eyebrow in their shared language of ready. Clara returned the signal. The day would run itself, it knew how now. They had made a new ritual, a small, private one. Before the first show, they would step into the empty auditorium and stand in the middle row where light fell in a soft rectangle across the seats. They never spoke there, they only listened, to the quiet, to the absence of dread, to the way the room offered back peace like a practiced prayer. Clara carried the flyers down the aisle and set them on the stage. The screen hung still, patient as a page not yet turned. She traced the apron's edge with her fingertips, felt the faint sawdust roughness beneath fresh paint, and smiled. The Liberty had a new memory now, children gasping at a hand, drawn dragon, a widow in the third row laughing for the first time in months, a teacher wiping her eyes at a student's documentary about the river that braided the town together. The building had learned gentleness. Later, in the office behind the lobby, a thin envelope waited. No return address, her name in careful script. She opened it over the desk that once held ledgers. Written by a haunted man, a single page slid out. "Ms. Reese, we close our investigations when walls stop speaking. Your theater is quiet. Consider this a thank you for your cooperation and your discretion. Some things belong to history more than headlines." A friend, a paper-clipped card fell in her hand, a contact at a nameless bureau, a number that would never answer unless the right story knocked. She tucked it into a drawer she rarely opened. The Liberty was not a case anymore. It was a place. She ate lunch on the back steps. Pigeons debated the crumb economy. Across the alley, ivy scaled a brick wall like patient handwriting. When the wind tilted right, she could hear kids rehearsing onstage for Friday's youth festival. Their voices rose and fell, awkward, brave, incandescent. Clara closed her eyes and let it wash over her. Once a theater had been a vault. Now it was a ladder. People came with offerings the way pilgrims bring candles. A widow donated her late husband's 8mm reels from the county fair. A retired projectionist brought a battered lens wrapped in flannel. It saw 1,000 nights. He said, "Let it see a few more." A fourth grader shyly handed over a thumb drive labeled in crooked marker, "My Grandma's Story." Clara logged each gift and learned to treat them like something sacred. The Liberty taught her that light, handled kindly, is a keeper of small eternities. On Wednesdays she wrote, not a book, at least not yet, but pages and pages of letters addressed to people who could no longer read them, to Raines, who had confused salvation with control, to Daniel Harper, who had chased truth until it outpaced him, to the woman in the golden vision, whose calm eyes had steadied the chaos. Clara didn't mail the letters. She folded them into a plain notebook with a cloth cover and placed it in the glass case beside the sealed steel door. Visitors paused there as if before a memorial, then walked on lighter. Sometimes the town asked for her to speak. She tried to refuse. This was never meant to be a story about her, but she found she could tell it now without trembling. She learned the right way to say difficult things. There was an experiment. It failed. People were hurt. The past was buried. The best thing we can do is give the present a stage. She kept the stranger parts in the space between sentences where the audience could feel them without fear. The press called once the place glowed again. She said no to big shows with toothy smiles and yes to the small podcast run by the high school A/V club. Their first question was perfect and impossible. What does light mean to you now? She thought a long time and answered, it means staying, not blinding, not burning, staying. On the day the State Historical Commission arrived, suits and clipboards, Clara felt a brief ripple of the old dread. They stood beneath the restored marquee, nodded, asked careful questions, and took their measure of the building's bones. Before they left, the lead historian took off her glasses and looked not at the walls, but at Clara's face. We don't have a form for what this is, she said, but we know it matters. They shook hands like people who had seen different maps of the same country and finally agreed on a name. At dusk, the sky bruised into rose and ash. String lights blinked to life along the eaves. The first audience of the night drifted in, an older man in a suit older than he was, teenagers holding hands like a treaty, a nurse in scrubs with her badge still clipped, a teacher, a mechanic, a woman alone with a paperback tucked into her coat pocket in case courage failed. Courage did not fail. Clara watched them take their seats and thought, we survived privately, now we heal publicly. The film was local, recorded voices over borrowed footage, the river in winter, a mill closing, a garden blooming where a factory had stood. When the credits rolled, no one clapped at first. They looked at one another instead, as if remembering there was a we in the room. Then the applause came, not thunder but rain, steady, clean, necessary. After, a little boy approached the stage carrying a cereal box painted to look like a camera. He pointed it at Clara and said very seriously, say light. She did. The cardboard shutter clicked. He nodded, satisfied, and ran back to the lobby where his mother waited with a proud smile and tired eyes. That was the moment Clara allowed herself to believe the theater belonged to the next story now. Out back, Lee leaned against the brick, breathy. Turning to Cloud in the cool, you ever miss it? She asked. The danger, the intensity, Lee said, searching for a word that wouldn't invite what they both remembered. Clara thought, I miss nothing that took more than it gave. She tucked a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear the way her own mother had once done. I like this intensity better. People choosing to sit in the dark together so they can feel less alone. They walked the alley in easy silence. Somewhere nearby, a radio played a song older than both of them. The notes felt like footprints on wet stone, evidence of passage, not possession. That night, after the last show, Clara made her rounds. She touched the back of the last seat in each row. Inventory of gratitude. She locked the side door, tested the manual release on the new fire curtain, snapped off lobby lamps until only the marquee remained. In the glass case, the steel door reflected a soft halo. It had become what she'd hoped, a warning disarmed into a lesson. She stood alone at center aisle and looked up. The restored ceiling constellation held still in the hush. She remembered the first time she'd seen it, peeling, wounded, beautiful despite itself. Someone had asked if she wanted the original mural faithfully reproduced. She had said no. Paint the stars as they are now. She told them not as they were. That was the only way to keep the past from stealing the present. On her way out, a small envelope lay beneath the ticket window. No stamp, her name again in a hand she did not know. Inside, a photograph, black and white, the Liberty in 1953, the night before premiere that had nearly unmade the town. The marquee shone like a crown. At the far left edge, a man in a hat had turned his head too quickly. His face was blurred into streaks of light. Someone had written on the back in pencil, "A lighthouse only works when it stays put." Clara smiled. She placed the photo on the bulletin wall in the lobby among the Polaroids and handbills and giggly selfies taken on opening week. An old warning tucked into new joy. People would ask, she would answer honestly, and the story would keep learning how to be told without devouring the teller. On the way home, she took the long route by the river. The water carried the day downstream in ribbons of pewter and pearl. The town lights stitched themselves onto the surface and unstitched again, a pattern with no need for perfection. She parked on the shoulder and listened to the hush between cars. For a moment, the old inner hum rose, faint as a heartbeat heard through a wall. It did not frighten her. It felt like a watchman making rounds. At her kitchen table, she opened the notebook where she kept the names. She added 2 more she'd learned that week from a box a stranger brought. A projectionist who sang to the reels, a seamstress who mended velvet curtains for tickets she never used. She read the list aloud, a litany that filled the room with the company of the once forgotten. When she finished, she closed the book and set it beside a small stone she'd taken from the theater foundation the day the last scaffolding came down. Weight and words, her reliquary. Before sleep, she stood at the window. Across town, the Liberty sign glowed modestly, not a beacon anymore, just a blessing. A moth tapped the glass. She turned off the lamp and let the dark be dark. In it, nothing reached for her. Nothing fed, nothing asked to be obeyed. She exhaled the way buildings do after renovations, long, grateful, surprised to still be standing. Morning would bring the ordinary avalanche, shemales, deliveries, a field trip of third graders who kept calling the auditorium the big whisper room. She would teach them how to be gentle with light. She would tell them how a story is a door that opens inward first. She would show them the glass case and say, not all mysteries are invitations. Some are boundaries we honor so the next mystery can arrive safely. And when the projector flared to life for the first show, a comedy about a baker who saves a town by listening, Clara would sit in the back with Lee and laugh at jokes they could predict and still love. She would hold the armrest just once, briefly, as if to thank the seat for catching her all the nights it had. She would watch the screen for what it had become, not an altar, not a trap, but a mirror that refused to lie. Outside, the town would go on making the small bravities of daily life. Apologies offered, locks replaced, gardens weeded, coffee refilled. And the Liberty would go on keeping time for them all, its doors opening at dusk like a heartbeat, learning, finally, how to be quiet without stopping. As the house settled and the night grew kind, Clara lay down, a hand over the quiet place in her chest where the gold once glowed. It answered not with light, but with rest, and somewhere, in the calm between yesterday and what comes next, the old theater breathed once, evenly, like a ship at anchor, and let the tide carry the story forward. As the night deepened, the light stayed, not burning, not demanding, simply present, reminding her that the film was still running, only gentler now, and that the reel of her life had room for one more bright morning. The town never forgot the night the Liberty reopened, and even as the months folded into seasons, the glow from that night lingered not as a story told, but as something felt. People came from other towns now not for gold, not for legend, but for the quiet kind of magic that happened inside its walls. The Liberty had become something no one planned, but everyone needed. A living reminder that even ruins could learn to speak again if someone listened long enough. Each visitor added something to the building's pulse. A musician left a note, wedged in a seat crack. Played my first song here. Felt my father in the echo. A woman left a pressed flower at the base of the stage. Children hid paper stars beneath the seats, for the ghosts, they said, though none of them feared those ghosts anymore. Every Friday night, when the last audience left and the lights dimmed, Clara stayed behind for her ritual. She swept the aisles herself, not because she had to, but because she loved the sound. The broom against the carpet made a rhythm like soft rain. Each sweep carried away a little dust, and each breath brought the sweet scent of something finished, something whole. On one of those nights, Lee joined her. Still cleaning like it's a church, she teased, leaning against a row of seats. Clara smiled without looking up. It is a church, just not for worship, for remembering. Lee watched her mother's slow, graceful movements, then said softly, "You're not haunted anymore, are you?" The broom stopped. For a heartbeat, the question hung in the air. Then Clara said, "No, I'm inhabited, That's different. Lee nodded, understanding more than words allowed. They turned off the final lights together, stepping out onto the sidewalk where the night air felt sharp and clean. The neon sign buzzed gently above them. The Liberty it read, the letters steady now, no flicker, no distortion. Beneath it, a small addition glowed in new paint. Founded 1943/reborn 2025. Lee reached for her mother's hand. You ever think you'll tell the whole story, the real one? Clara's eyes softened. Maybe one day, but not as confession as invitation. There's a difference. Lee tilted her head. Invitation to what? To look closer, Clara said, at what's hidden behind the light. They walked home together under streetlights that hummed faintly, not with gold, not with electricity, but with memory. A year later, the Liberty hosted something it never had before, an outdoor screening. The film was projected onto the side of the building itself, the same brick wall that had once sealed Rain's secret vault. Families sat on blankets under a violet sky. Kids chased fireflies near the curb. The film, a short piece by the local school, told the story of the town's rebuilding. Its last line, written by a 12-year-old narrator, said, "When the world gets dark, find someone who remembers the light and sit beside them until you can see again." When the film ended, the audience turned toward the building as if waiting for it to breathe again. And maybe it did, just a little. Clara stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands folded loosely. Someone came up beside her, an older woman she didn't recognize. "You're the owner?" the woman asked. "I suppose I'm the caretaker now," the woman smiled. "Places like this don't need owners, just guardians." Clara smiled back. "Then I think it's safe." The woman nodded, then disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind the faint scent of lilac and something older, something that reminded Clara of the past. She turned her gaze upward, toward the bricks still warm with light. For just a moment, she swore she saw faces there again, not screaming, not pleading, but peaceful, watching, and among them, faint but unmistakable, Jonathan Rains smiling as though he had finally forgiven himself. The image faded with the last frame of the reel. Clara didn't cry. She only whispered, "Thank you," to the night. Years passed quietly, the way stories do when they no longer need to be dramatic to matter. The Liberty outlived headlines. It outlived gossip. It became part of the landscape, like the river, like the clock tower, like the smell of popcorn drifting across downtown every weekend. When people spoke of it now, they didn't mention gold or the ghost light. They talked about weddings held on its stage, about local artists who showed films there, about the sense that time itself slowed down inside those walls. And in a way, maybe it did. Because inside the Liberty, nothing was ever fully gone. Every laugh, every tear, every whispered line from an old film seemed to hang suspended in the air, a constellation of moments too small for cameras to capture, but too real to die. Sometimes, when she was alone late at night, Clara could still feel it, the faint shimmer behind the curtain, the warmth that never quite faded. She didn't fear it anymore. It wasn't haunting. It was presence, continuity, the kind of light that stays. One winter evening after the final show of the year, Clara wrote a note and left it in the ticket drawer. She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. For whoever finds this place next, don't worry about the ghosts. They're only the echoes of people who loved something enough to stay. If you listen closely, the light will tell you where to go. Keep it shining, see. Then she locked the doors, turned off the lights, and walked home through softly falling snow. The theater stood silent. Behind her, its windows dark except for one faint glimmer, the reflection of a single street lamp caught in the glass. It flickered once, twice, then steadied, not gold this time, just light, simple, pure and enough. And as dawn rose over the town, the liberty remained not a monument to what was lost, but a living testament to what was found. Because in the end, every story that survives begins the same way, with someone brave enough to walk into the dark, and someone kind enough to turn on the projector. The screen fades to white. A soft echo of Clara's voice, older now, distant, almost like narration. Light doesn't belong to the past or the future. It belongs to whoever still believes it matters. The reel slows, the hum stops, the liberty breathes out one last time, and the story ends, not with a final frame, but with light that never leaves.